Hey everybody, I'm here with my first interview with 800pixelgorilla, who it took me until after I beat the entire game to get like the name essentially. Like I'm like, oh, it's 800-pound gorilla, like it's a riff. I didn't process it the whole time. I was actually like trying to actually solve puzzles involving your name at one point. But he's the creator of a game called Lock, which is exclusively available right now on Dreams, which is just a hell of a gem to find. Like you, at first glance, you look into this and you're poking around like, oh, this looks pretty impressive for a thing that was made of like in like a console like game maker suite thing. And then over the course of the game, you kind of just forget it was made inside of anything, and it just unironically and with no extra like caveats or anything, it's just a fantastic puzzle game that's just really cool to find. And this was a cool discovery, and it was cool to go through the wave of introducing people to it, and then them like getting like 10 minutes into the first episode and then bouncing off and being like, nope, BRB, I'm gonna go play the entire game and come back later. And so this was was neat. So we have all sorts of questions. I put them out to Patreon asking like just what they wanted to ask you about this, because I thought that'd be a decent amount. There was a lot of interest in this because a lot of people really engaged with this game in particular. And a little out of my element here, but you were just in the comments and just very publicly like just available, and I'm like, I guess I should try to do an interview, right? That's what people do in my position when they're like some kind of professional. But I think this is the most obvious first question to have is this. I'm so sorry that I don't know how to pronounce your name, but Aruna Shalom Alagapon asks, maybe I'm just a greedy guy here, but why didn't you make this a standalone game and sell it separately? You probably started messing around in Dreams to make a small game, but once you realized this was going to be a proper full-fledged puzzle game, did you think of quitting Dreams and making it in a different engine? $10 for this game on Steam and console stores would be an easy buy for a lot of us. And I asked this kind of knowing some of the answer already.
Yeah, that's kind of a bigger question than it seems. The whole like making a game in Dreams is kind of, it's not as daunting as it seems, I guess, than like making a game for real. And so like a lot of the reason for it to exist is just because dreams exist. Like I would never have thought to make a real game. I mean, I just don't have the technical expertise. You know, I'd have to have other people involved to help me make a real version of this. And so
there's like a level of scale, like you'd have to be a company.
Well, there's just like the hurdles, the barrier to entry is just much higher. The kind of the promise of Dreams is that it is to let you just kind of sit down and go, and like the distance between you having a good idea and actually having it be something that someone else can play is very, very short as compared to like any other tool where the distance between those two things would be very, very long. And so I knew I was going to make something big. That was always my goal, was to make something like this when I first learned about Dreams. So I had been planning this game for a while, and it just never occurred to me, like maybe this is just maybe humbly, I guess, it just never occurred to me that what I was making would be desirable enough that people would actually pay money for it. Like I just never really even had those thoughts until after it was released. And then, you know, people reacting to it and saying things like that, like, oh, I'd pay $10 for this easy, are things that have made me think, well, maybe, mm-hmm. You know, maybe I should have done something different, or maybe I should do something different moving forward. And so I don't, it's a kind of a hard question to answer because there was never an intention to like make money to make this. It was just something I wanted to do. And so I guess the post success of it has kind of,
that sort of reaction of like maybe that there actually is something here.
Yeah, and
I get it too. Like around the same time I started launching like my essay channel, and I just was kind of just seeing what I could do at all, you know what I mean? And then exactly. I just have these like waves of positivity. I'm like, I wasn't ready for this. I don't know what to do with this. Exactly. I guess I should try to do more.
I mean, it's kind of like I guess I don't think of it in the way that like, well, I'm good at this sort of thing. Like that I'm good enough to make something for money. Like I've never had that opinion of myself. And so like, it'd be a weird position to be in, to be like halfway through making this in Dreams and then being like, you know what? I think I should make this for money. Like it's just, I don't know. It takes some kind of confidence, maybe that I don't have, to make that leap. I mean, even this thing took me like 2 years, and that was doing it the easy way. So
You must have started like right away, right? Because Dreams isn't very old, is it?
as soon as like, they announced it at some E3 like a million years back or whatever it was, and it was one of those nebulous announcements where you're like, what even? Like, what is that? Like, this is just bizarre. This, like, what even are you guys doing? And so you didn't really know what it was. And then I don't know, it's like a couple years after that, they like showed them using it to do stuff. And then like, oh, okay, I get it. It's like a game. It's like a game engine. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, they never really said that, but you could tell that's what was going on.
Yeah.
You know? And so like, at that moment, I was like, oh, I'm doing that. I'm going to totally get involved in that. I used to do like Flash games back in the day when that was a thing, like professionally. And that just kind of went away. And there was never really a good avenue to do that again. And I always liked the immediacy of that platform. And so this kind of just scratched that same itch. And so as soon as they, showed that second whatever that was preview, I forget exactly what it was, but I was like, okay, now it's time to figure out what I'm going to do. And like, I guess I started working on this game at that moment. So it took a long time to, form into a real thing. And obviously it changed.
I'm sort of like
time.
fixating on these textures a little bit, but I assume this is sort of like inherent to how things are rendered in Dreams, or was this a specific art choice that you make? I was always curious about that throughout this. Like I couldn't really tell how the visuals work exactly, because like there's like a certain like this looks like a bunch of like brush like dollops or dabs, I guess, and then like there's a certain like fuzzy edge to everything, and I'm like, is this like how visuals are rendered in Dreams specifically, or is this the way you chose to design these visuals?
For the most part, that's how Dreams works, I would say. Like, Dreams doesn't use your standard, like, polygon sort of texture sort of method where you make a shape and then you texture it. Like, Dreams uses what's called flex, which is those kind of paint daub looking things there on everything. Like, you can control the density of it, like, as you're making things, but that also increases your the limit. Like, you only have so much room in a single scene in Dreams, and so like the more high fidelity you make something, like the more graphically intensive it becomes.
So it's like the object limit you see in like the almost like the time splitters in Halo, like level editors. Like there's like that, like a budget.
Yeah, there's a budget for different things. Like there's a sound budget, there's like a number of things budget, and then there's like a graphics budget. And so the quote unquote tighter you make something, which is like what you'd like if you raise the tightness all the way up, you can't really see those, but then like a single block takes up like 10% of your budget, and so you just can't really do that and make something like this. So I just have to turn everything.
These trees are just so relaxing to look at.
Yeah, the trees are actually somebody else's. So that's the biggest thing about Dreams is when people make like an asset, like a tree, let's say, they just put it out there and like label it remixable, and then anybody using the platform can just put that tree into their scene. And so I'd say like 80% of the stuff in the game is actually stuff I didn't even make. It's just stuff I found and maybe like recolored or reshaped slightly just so it would feel consistent. Like, since if you look at the credits, there's like 1 million names on everything, because Dreams does a really good job of accrediting every single asset that gets placed. So, nobody's getting their stuff just taken and used for free or without any kind of recognition. But yeah.
I suppose we should do a little bit of a primer on what Dreams is for people that don't know, like PC gamers and so on that might have just been out of the loop. But there is a PS4 game that is currently like compatible to PS5 also, where you can just really go in depth on making your own game essentially. And so unfortunately it's kind of locked to that specific format, and there's no like pricing and storefront specifically, but people seem to be making some really interesting stuff with that. I'll definitely have to ask you later about other games too. But looking at this graphic style in particular, it definitely made me get caught off guard all the more when there was a cutscene at one point, and it very much didn't look like fuzzy trees.
Yeah, the cutscene's a different scene. So that one of the things, like, so I cram a lot in. Like, this is all one scene. Then that's kind of an insane thing to do, because you can have hundreds and hundreds of scenes in a single game. The limit on scenes is very high, so there's no reason to, like, for most games, if you were making like a Mario platformer style game, you could have every level be its own scene, and you'd have a lot more room to make each thing look good. I wanted everything to be in the same place because I didn't want to have those transitions in this. And so all the graphics in my game kind of suffer universally. They all have to be like lowered in quality quite a bit, which is why there's kind of a softness to everything. Whereas if you look at some other games that people have made, they've broken it up into several scenes, and so they can increase the fidelity and increase the quality a lot higher than what I was aiming for.
Yeah, and you pull some tricks here, which we'll get to. But as a quick primer, or I guess a spoiler gate for people that may have found this video without the context of already playing the game and so on, you can go find Dreams on PS4 and PS5. You can go find Lock and other games via that storefront, and maybe elsewhere in the future. But you might want to hop off and go do that if you haven't already played the game or seen my playthrough or have some other wider context, because it's going to get spoilery pretty quick. I'm doing a little visual aid here, so we have stuff to look at and context for what we're talking about. But if you've been looking at this very colorful island that seems really small, and I tell you that small island contains like 6 to 8 hours of puzzle gameplay, then probably 6 to 10, and that piques your interest, then you probably should go pursue that now and come back to us later. It's worth the trip. And it's the type of thing where in Myst or The Witness, which are very obvious things to think of at the moment you see an island like this, there are irreversible spoilers that will occur if you pursue further. I've technically already accidentally shown a few that I've tried to look away from, but we're going to be delving a lot deeper immediately. So that's your the final warning. If you like these kinds of games, definitely check it out.
I would also say that you don't even have to purchase Dreams to play this. This game they've put it in the demo for Dreams. So if you mentioned download the demo, which is free, this will be one of the things you can try out in the demo, which is really, really cool.
That's got to be like a really cool recognition moment, right? Like when you make a game within this thing, and then like the company that made it in the first place specifically singles out your project as being like what they want to use to sell their game, to the point where you can just play this game for free. You just need the console, which is a bit of a buy-in.
There's a lot of other games too in the demo that are really, really strong. So yeah, it's good company. But yeah, it does feel good to have that sort of level, and if it gets more people to play Dreams, I think that's a good thing. That's one of the things we need the most, is just more people playing. Like, there's enough people making stuff, but more people playing would be great.
Before we get into the next viewer questions, let's just look at the trick that you pull here, which is that this house is hot nonsense. Which, by the way, I'll point out that at the beginning of this playthrough, I definitely looked at this deck and was really fixated on this pipe and this deck, like something was going to happen or there was something to interpret there. But that was all me. If anything, it just meant it was all the more sealed in my brain that when there was a back door, that doesn't make sense. There's a deck here. The deck that obviously means something. But there's some, I don't know if non-Euclidean's the right term for it, but there's basic spatial relations that don't makes sense in this game. And since you don't have it all unlocked at the beginning, like you slowly open up one door at a time over the course of the opening hours, it doesn't necessarily dawn on the player immediately. Like this back door, you might see the back door and think, but there's no back door. But if you don't think about it that solidly, or you think there's just like a room back there that's still inside the house, it's not that much. But like, you take a few laps to and from this kitchen to the outdoors, and eventually you have to register this house is massive on the inside compared to the outside. And as if almost tauntingly, you look out here and there's like a forest in a different season entirely.
Yeah, it does take some players notice it quicker than others. I've seen some people not ever notice. It's kind of funny.
It genuinely, I think I genuinely didn't quite notice for like the first 20 minutes, and even thought weird that window shows a different environment without fully registering that like this house it has no space in it. That's why I gave the little primer of like, hey, this game has like 6 to 10 hours of gameplay, by the way, even though it looks like this house is like the size of the room I'm recording this podcast in. It quickly. Do you want to talk about the trick here?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very simple, actually, from a technical perspective, because it's just the rooms are just grouped together as their own like items or objects or whatever, and there's these things in Dreams called zones, which can detect a number of things, but one of the things they can detect is the player. And so I just have a bunch of those zones like very carefully placed, so that when they detect the player, they either turn some of these rooms on or off. And essentially that's all that's really happening, is that the rooms are being, hidden from view, let's say, based on where the player is standing, or they're not. The hardest one is obviously when you're standing outside and you can see all the way to the back from the front. And so that means that the backyard has to be cut up in slices, so that way, depending on the angle you're looking at.
That's a fun trick to think about. Like, you have to be showing like the fence and the tree, but not any of the wider boundaries.
Right. So that view of the backyard you're looking at right there is literally just it's literally there. Like, it's just a slice. Like, none of the rest of the backyard has loaded in yet.
So like, if I could leave the character standing here and like hover the camera away, I could probably see like a weird like hill out in the middle of the ocean.
Basically, yes. And I just like you just like, it just turns off there when you get far enough away. There are some spots that I know of where the illusion breaks, but they're really hard to find, and they're you have to be standing just right or move just right. And you can kind of outpace it too. Like, if you move really quickly,
like the game will not load fast enough.
Yeah, there's instances where some of the rooms don't load in properly, but like, because the game is so weird, like, people just assume it's part of the game, which is fine by me.
I definitely started getting in the headspace where once I caught on to what was happening, I had to like start analyzing how the hell it works. And I think you confirmed one of my ideas in the comments, where I was like, this is a double door at the beginning because it has to constrain your view of the left and right, doesn't it? Because otherwise,
that's correct.
You could see the outside world and you could see this room on the right loading in. So like, you have to have a second door frame, so you can't see that deep until you're already past this threshold. Otherwise, it would just be I guess a hallway would just go like shooting out to the right. I don't know how big the chunks are.
Yeah, well, I could have solved that problem with making smaller chunks, but it was just, Dreams, making logic and stuff in Dreams is can be tedious at times in doing something like that. I just would rather make the walls, the double doorway than try to take the effort to split everything up. And really, the whole reason this exists in the first place, and this will shatter any illusions of me being clever, is the whole reason the house is non-Euclidean is because I didn't want to have to model the outside of the house.
You didn't want to have an Edith Finch house to model.
Yes. Yeah, there's so much extra. If you imagine all the rooms being there and the upstairs and all that stuff being there from the get-go, and you're standing outside, the house would be a much bigger challenge to build.
I imagine that it's almost not even shaped like a house would ever be, right? Like, it's just it's almost like a mess if you can see it from the outside.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But like, I was just like, man, if you're only in the house, like you never really, it's really hard to like understand the outside. So the whole kind of reason the non-Euclidean stuff exists is because I was just too lazy.
I gotta
But
say, it's so deeply satisfying to open up an environment over time. Like it's just such a base level thing, but like it feels like like I don't know how much this is true, but like it feels like this like escape room influence where like the big flourish you have in an escape room is that you're being conditioned to like observe every little detail around what's around you, and you're trying to figure out what is noise and what's data. And then the moment something finally clicks, a door opens and your environment changes, and not only is there a new location with new environmental interactions, but then like some of the things from the different rooms affect each other, and like that sprawlingness where like suddenly you're like, okay, I have all these rooms open, and like now there's another floor, now there's another layer to the puzzles, now there's another thing going on here, like that's what's really satisfying about these like observational environments. Like it's really cool. And there was this aspect where like you immediately show us these like heavily signposted portraits everywhere. It's like they're so specific that they have to be a puzzle for something. But the funny thing is that even though they prime you to observe things, there's details about them that aren't obvious that they're important, like the frames. But then even when you're already being primed to like focus on these really specific things in your environment, it's still so easy to, even after being primed to like take in everything, like hyperfixate on the wrong things. Like these board games must be really important, but the dartboards that doesn't matter. Don't look at that too closely.
Yeah, that's a hard balance. Like that was one of the, because in my mind I'd always planned on having nothing in the game matter. I mean, nothing in the game, not matter. Like everything had to have a purpose for being. But then I also was like, oh, I want it to be super decorative and like have look like a real space. And I'm like, those two ideas just aren't compatible. Like,
Oh yeah.
You can't have a decorated space and then have everything not be noise. And so it did become a challenge of culling just the right amount of stuff to like get that balance to where players felt like everything was mattering, but then it also didn't feel empty. And so like I'm not sure I 100% nailed that, but again, like it's the kind of thing that you have to like learn, I think.
It's definitely a fun surprise when you dismiss something as just decorative for about 4 hours before realizing it's the crux of everything that you're stuck on, and the only reason you're not getting, or is this the cake from Portal?
I think so. That was not intentional. That was somebody else's cake I pulled. I just searched cake in the Dreamiverse library, and I was like, oh, that one looks nice. And so maybe a different cake would have been better because everybody has that comment.
I honestly think I don't know if I even registered that during the playthrough, to be honest. I think it just clicked just now, but I'm like, hang on a minute. Some archetypical stuff here, like the island obviously is going to make people think of The Witness and Mist a bit, whether intentional or not. And so stumbling onto the portal cake, you could just own that as intentional. Like it just fits the genre at least,
Sure,
as opposed to just being like a non sequitur. Speaking of exactly that topic, actually, Cold Guy asked, how did the idea of Locke come to be? Were you inspired by other games? What made you make the games in Dreams? I guess the last part we've covered already, but...
Yeah, I think... Well, so The Witness and like games like Myst obviously have their influence. The Witness is definitely one of the games that I played and I was like, oh man, like I don't understand game design. Like this game does, and so like that was pretty formidable in my opinions about games, like just that game in general, and just the subsequent hearing about that game and what went into it. But I wouldn't say The Witness is influencing the reason I made this game. This game is coming from like this other concept of I don't know, like this game starts off with the message, Locke is a puzzle hunt style game, which is kind of a cryptic sort of message because most people don't even know what a puzzle hunt is, and it's like a style of puzzle. it's it's hard to describe, but usually it's on a different complexity level than what most puzzles or escape room style puzzles are on, and it uses a lot of wordplay. So they're usually like
Speaking of which,
solution's a word, and all the puzzles are very esoteric in the fact that they give you very limited information. They don't tell you how to solve it, and it becomes kind of you have to like sleuth out the method, and it can be as complex of like it's like a list of album names, and you look up all those albums on the internet, and then you notice that they're all the the bands on those albums are in alphabetical order, and then you do something weird, and et cetera, and that's the complexity of like a puzzle hunt style puzzle, which is it requires a lot of research, requires a lot of trial and error, but the methods involved in those puzzles I've always been very fascinated by, and they're very clever. The biggest issue I have with them is they're very challenging, and there's not a lot of consideration for new people to get into the genre. You kind of just have to like fail a lot.
It's almost like you have to play the genre in the right order to like have the right on-ramping experience.
Right. Well, I would say that there isn't any on-ramp currently. You just have to kind of keep trying them and keep not understanding anything and like looking at the answers and like how they do it, and do that enough until eventually you kind of get a hold of the gist. You kind of get a hold of like the different ways you solve and the different techniques and stuff. And it's just like, and once you've jumped over that hurdle, or you're just like immensely intelligent, which I'm not even. Once you get over that hurdle, you can enjoy them more thoroughly and actually solve them. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to take that kind of the way those puzzles are made. I wanted to take that ethos and actually make a game where there was an on-ramp, where it was very introductory in the sense that it wasn't assuming that you understood how those puzzles worked or anything like that, and just take that thinking about those type of puzzles and put it into a game you could play, and not so much the way those puzzles are normally formatted as like a one page, like you print it out, like it's a single page of paper. And it's just a bunch of words.
I think viewers mailed me like puzzle books that you're supposed to tear the pages out of essentially and solve them.
Yeah, it's similar to those. Yeah, and sometimes they're just so like you have to think really laterally to get the right answer, And so, and there's been a couple puzzle hunt like video games, but like they're even more obscure than this. And they are not easy. They're even harder, right? Because the designers are steeped into their, I guess, puzzle culture, let's say. And so it does kind of fit that mold of just being very esoteric and lateral. And so I just really thought there was room for something like this to exist. And that was where the whole idea to like, how do I make that game? Like, what does that game look like? And what is it trying to do?
Do you have like examples that come to mind for like those kinds of games? Because I at this point I've been like steeped into the puzzle games for years for part of my job, but like I have no like cultural context for like what anything is called or what like the subgenres necessarily are, and I end up making up my own at best.
Like the genre is either called puzzle hunt or mystery hunt. If you there is an online, like there's an online site called Puzzled Pint, which has like the print and play versions, like where it's just like a sheet of paper, and those are generally on the easier side, but they're still very hard. But as far as like the video games ones goes, I can't even recall the name. There's like one or two at best, right? And so it's like I can't the name. I've just watched YouTube videos of people play them, and they're not. They're not the type of games I would recommend people play. They're not what I would call good. They're just very, 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 very hard. Like that's the kind of hard where you'd be stuck on the very first thing for days, and then that's the point, sort of thing. And so like I don't even know if I would recommend that. That's why I wanted this game to exist, because I wanted to be like, is there a way to make those type of puzzles like not unapproachable?
I'm sort of
And
reminded
so,
of like that universal story that everyone seems to tell about how they encountered mist on like some like grandparents' computer when they were too young for it, and like they just clicked around a bit and there was like no, like, because they didn't have like context for like even what the type of video game was, it was just
yeah,
impenetrable, which is like weird
yeah,
because like once you've made that hurdle, you can't it's almost hard to empathize with what it was like to not understand it,
hmm,
because like once you're conditioned, it's like how like once upon a time I couldn't understand what a CRPG was because I only played Diablo. Like, so like you would launch up Fallout and you would just not know how to like start playing at all. And like, yeah, like there's like, and like I can imagine that's like an element of like this kind of stuff, is that you're trying to figure out even what your audience is and what they would expect, or how to sort of
right.
how to make your converts.
Yeah, I totally was prepared for like I think you had in the first video there was a single person that reacted like they sounded like they were familiar with puzzle hunts.
Yeah, I saw
And
you
yeah,
get into like this jargon heavy conversation with someone that
y-
seemed to know way more about the specifics already.
yeah, and they were like disappointed that it was like I was using like the most like cliched or tropiest like solving methods to begin with, and I'm like, that's the point. Like it's like I knew as soon as like a puzzle hunt person saw this, like they would be like, oh, this is like this is like child's play version of their puzzles. So to like call it that is almost like a no for them, I would imagine. But I don't know what else to do to like bridge that gap. You know, it needs to be approachable. So I just knew I was going to get that sort of reaction from at least a few people.
Puzzles are weird like that. Like you have this you get the full blanket of every experience simultaneously, where
Mhm.
there's this whole crowd of people that can't understand how anyone is solving this game, and then other people that see it as like preschool stuff, and
It is.
and they don't understand why anyone's entertained by it.
But if I had made like a game for that guy, I would have made a game for nobody. Like I feel like
You would have
like,
made a game for just that guy.
yeah, basically. And so so the goal is, and this is where I kind of think I fell down a little bit, was like at the end of the game, and this is back into spoiler territories, you get the book that's full of like 1-page puzzles that are like kind of standalone, and they use the like clues from the environment to solve. And that book is supposed to be like the one-to-one analog to like a real puzzle hunt puzzle. Right. And so the whole point of the game was, and this is where it kind of feels weird to people who don't, like basically everybody actually, is that book part. Like people either hate that part or really like that part, because it is kind of dips in difficulty. It becomes pretty easy actually, and it feels kind of counter to the rest of it doesn't feel like it fits as much with the rest of the game. But the whole point was, I wanted you to play the game and then get that book and then not be afraid of those puzzles because they don't really tell you what to do. Right. And so it was my way of saying, you know, I've taught you how to do a puzzle hunt. Now here's like a real one, even though what ended up happening is the real one was fairly straightforward and easy. Right. Like these.
Yeah,
So these were.
I came down here to go open it, only remembering then that it was with me all along.
Right. So like if I gave you this book, like that first page from the get-go without ever playing the game, you wouldn't even know what to do. It would just be confusing.
Yeah.
You know? And so like that was the point, was that like when you see something like this puzzle, like these pages, like you can do it. You just have to like contextualize things properly. And that's kind of the whole point of a puzzle hunt, is you just have to put everything in the right context and then it makes sense. And so I wanted to kind of on-ramp you into being able to do this book. And the thing I erred on was I think I made the book too easy. And so I could have made the book a lot more challenging, and made it feel like it fit that mold a little better. But, you know, something I will correct if I ever.
Definitely the most intimidating visual is this wall. And just wondering what it's even going to turn out to be. Like your imagination invents like 100 overly complex ideas of what you might even be expected to do with this thing.
Yeah.
But the book is like scratching an itch, where you finally turn to the page and you see like, it's the fucking frames. There they are. Mm-hmm. I've been waiting 6 hours to find something about these.
Yeah. And those are all using classic like puzzle hunt techniques. The really cliched puzzle hunt techniques. None of the really advanced ones where you're like opening up spreadsheets and really distributing the letters or whatever. Like there's all kinds of advanced stuff that I didn't even touch.
Makes me wonder if I'm underexposed. I don't know. There's certain parts where I'm like, okay, here we go. It's this. We're doing this again. And then there's other parts where I'm like, this is like really novel, and I wasn't ready for this. That you have, in particular, you have one game-spanning reveal that is just one hell of a thing to notice, and then kick yourself for not noticing every time you walked into any room, which is a great moment.
That was an early on idea. I knew I was going to do that, and so
had to be right.
Yeah, I tried to set the game up to do just that. I think in retrospect, I could have made the rooms even look more like what they're supposed to look like, because I kind of obscured them out of fear that people would notice too quickly. But upon watching people play it, I feel like I could have made the rooms look exactly like what they're supposed to look like, and no one would question it. Yeah, no one would have noticed.
This is like this is like a weirdly funny moment, is getting to the end of the leaf maze and then getting what is essentially the solution to the leaf maze. Like, congratulations, you've already wandered through the whole thing. Here's the map that tells you how to do what you've done already. I don't remember if that was a puzzle specifically. It's been a bit since the playthrough.
Yeah, it was a weak hint to the second part of the puzzle, which like I've already kind of redesigned for how it really should have been. The map probably shouldn't even be there, to be honest. It was kind of like
it does work as a joke if nothing else.
Yeah, I guess.
Just the idea of like, here you go, here's the map after you've already found what is seemingly the prize room. But I think you mentioned this before in the comments too, but like do you still have plans for releasing this on other platforms?
Yeah, I'm currently working with a couple people to move this over in Unity, and then we're planning to release it on Steam and whatever other platforms we can, but Steam would be the first thing. It does present some interesting challenges, because with Dreams, I know everybody's got a PlayStation controller, and so some of the puzzles were like the whole panel interactions are based off the controller. Yeah, and so like we came into the problem real quick that like, well, everybody has a keyboard now, so it becomes a little awkward to have people like arrow through panels instead of just type the solutions. But I was just we'll just stick with it and see what happens.
The interesting question of like you made a game around a specific control scheme, so it's kind of like when like the room games get converted to non-touchscreen platforms, and they kind of like fundamentally changes the nature of what some of the puzzles are, or like how 999, the game that's infamous in these halls, has several parts of the game that are built exclusively around the idea of being a dual screen game. And so if you make it wider audience available on Steam and PlayStation and even the Vita, you lose the original language that the game was metatextually interacting with.
Yeah, and that's going to happen here. It's just, I mean, it would be I'd have to make a completely different game if I was to like really incorporate, a universal thing. Like, so I'm just gonna like not address it, and it's just gonna be one of those things that's weird, and I'm probably not gonna be the greatest sort of interaction point. But a lot of people on the computer play with their controllers anyways, so maybe it won't be so bad. But we'll just have to see how it goes. Big
controller recommended stamp.
Yeah, basically
the usual.
Unfortunately.
I wonder about that stuff. Like, I think about I feel like Undertale pulls some weird stuff, or like Pony Island does, but like a lot of indie games like to pull, this is a computer game doing a computery thing, and like, or like making the game crash on purpose as a like having the game close as a result of your actions, then being like, here's a text file in your folder. And I always wonder like what some of those games do when they try to convert that to like being a PS4 game and fundamentally lose the language that they were interacting with.
Yeah, it's such a hard challenge too. I don't even have good answers, because it's just, at some point, I guess it just depends on how much that moment is actually like core to what your game is about.
Yeah.
And so like how much you keep it or not. Like for me, like the input method on the panels is pretty core to the game, and like I can't, so much so that changing it would be changing the game. Like I can't, you know what I mean? It's so integrated.
Yeah, it can be weird to type onto the panels, especially when some of the panels have some special characters that you can't discover if you're just typing it. Let's see, I think we got through all that. Paul L asks, were there any early ideas or puzzles that didn't make it into the final game? Which, like, I'm sure the answer is yes, but the implication is, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're mostly just harder puzzles, like, or just really bad ideas. Like a lot of the puzzles were a lot harder to begin with, and they kind of smoothed out over playtesting or got cut. And so, because again, I was trying to make this on-ramp style game and not necessarily like a really hard puzzle game, even though a lot of people will say that it is really hard.
You got to save those for Lock 2 Revengeance.
Yeah, well, like, yeah, we can get into that. Well, there's another question I think that somebody asked that I think will lead into that a little better, but yeah, it's mostly just bad puzzles or just really hard puzzles. Like the book, I cut a lot of the book ideas that because I thought they were too hard, or they ended up being too hard, and I didn't know what to like. Pacing this sort of game is really challenging because not only are all the puzzles kind of like touching on a different sort of, like some people are good at math and some people are good at spatial things and some people are good at wordplay, and all the puzzles kind of fit in a different niche. And so that's what I think is one of the strengths about the game, is like every puzzle is very different and you don't use the same sort of like solving technique on each one. You're always accessing a different like skill set. But then what that does is make pacing it very difficult. And
then on top of that, it's kind of non-linear.
Yeah. You could essentially open a lot of the doors before you even solve anything. If you know what you're doing. But yeah, it's just, so the book came down to like, do I want the game to just like grind to a halt here, or do I want the player to just have a bunch of successes in a row? Because we're nearing the end of the game. And so I just don't know what the right answer for that question is. Because some people will say, well, you want the ending of the game to be, you know, the most challenging part of the game, because it's the ending. So you want it to be like the biggest hurdle to overcome, like, so it feels the most rewarding. And so I opted for kind of this roller coaster approach where, you know, you'd just done something really big and huge, and then you get like the book and the contents, which is a scavenger hunt style thing, which is again another puzzle hunt kind of trope, is to end the thing with the scavenger hunt.
And I guess it's sort of like it's rewarding your experience up to that point, because at that point you've unlocked the whole map, and it's rewarding you for paying attention to what you've found so far.
Yeah, so I opted for it to be like that, sort of like an easier downslope with a little bit of some gotchas that slow you down. But ideally, I wanted, once you got that big reveal, like for you to kind of go on to cruise mode and be able to just like have a lot of successes in a row and just get to the end where maybe you get stuck, because the very last puzzle is pretty tricky. It's not hard, it's just tricky. And so it does lead to the situation where, like, I think even you said in your playthrough, like, oh, it feels a little weird to be doing something like this at this point in the game.
Oh, the word search.
Yeah, the word search, because it seems so like rudimentary compared to like a lot of the things you had just done, which I completely agree with. And it's just like finding that right balance. And so, you know, maybe that should have got cut for one of my other ideas that was a little bit harder, but
definitely my two favorite memories, like realizations, was like, one was realizing what every room was shaped like, and two was realizing that everything has its eyes carefully removed unless it's the eyes that are important to puzzles, which is just such a thing to realize across the entire map, that nothing has eyes unless it's supposed to.
I think you're the first person to actually point that out that I've watched play. Most people don't even like put the two and two together, but yeah, I even missed a couple, like the first couple playthroughs I watched, I had eyes on things that I had forgotten about. And so like I had to go back through and cull more eyes from things, which is such a weird thing to do.
A very specific job to have.
Yeah.
Eyes have
it's
to
not
be
something
removed.
you think about. Yeah.
But it's like puzzles I like that the game builds like a vocabulary essentially, and then continues to reapply them later. So like the eye stuff is obviously learned in like the second or first room of the game, but then you start realizing it has wider context outside of that environment.
Yeah, that was one of my early ideas for the progression, was to make sure. I always knew I wanted to do this like dual layer thing, and that's where maybe The Witness had some more influence than other games. Is just like I knew I wanted to have like the puzzles contained to the rooms for the first go, and then I wanted that to teach you something, like a way to look at the world. And then, the second level of solution was trying to incorporate that same teaching outside, the environment of the room. And so like you kind of can reapply it to finding new things. And some rooms are a lot easier to do that with than others. Some rooms super hard and kind of clunky at the end of the day, but
you definitely ignite a lot of people's imaginations, because there's definitely a lot of people that love this genre, and like one of the things you do when you play enough of these games is you kind of like wonder about how to do that, and like what is the internal logic, and like where do you learn even what puzzles are, or how do you get the vocabulary for it, and then how do you like structure a campaign around that. I think like probably like half these questions are ultimately about that actually.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that's the next question. Levercon asks, I'd love to know more about the process of designing a puzzle. I physically printed out a paper with these questions on it because I'm out of screens. I'd love to know more about the process of designing a puzzle. Do you start with the epiphany and work backwards from there? Is there a process of coming up with some good functional puzzles and then working out a way of connect them in a satisfying way, or does something completely different happen?
I mean, that's sort of close to the truth. I think it obviously depends on the person and it depends on the game. Some type of puzzle games, and it depends on, the type of puzzle game is really important. So if you're looking at traditional like Sokoban style puzzle games where it's like you're pushing, like a Good Snowman's hard to build, or the Monster Exploration, or what is it, Monster Expedition or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's Monsters Expedition. That has some reveals.
Yeah, I'm still playing that, so I don't know. But like the method of those games is like, or Steven Sausage Roll is another one where to design those puzzles, you kind of have to know the whole rule set, but then like the puzzles individually are they're about an idea usually, but you can kind of make like a bunch of different versions of those puzzles and then like just cut the bad ones, and you can largely just they're like order of operations style puzzles, right? And so you can kind of just mix and match and build those puzzles, or build a bunch of different versions of those puzzles and see what works. But then you have games like this where it's like the puzzles are a little less defined, like what is a puzzle. It's not in Steven Sausage Roll, like the goal of every puzzle is to cook the sausages, right? So it's like what you're doing, and the different steps when you're designing those. It's still hard and challenging. It's just a different thing. Whereas here is like I was mostly dealing with a bunch of constraints. So I knew where I was trying to end up. I knew what I was trying to. I knew what like tropes I was pulling from, and then it's just a matter of figuring out what methods are interesting. And sometimes that involves like what they said, which was starting with the aha moment or the epiphany, where it's like, oh, I want people, like the map room, for instance, I want people to realize that the method to solving this puzzle is to, press the keypad in a certain sequence, and that'll make the word appear on the screen, right? I knew that was a cool method for solving the puzzle, and then
the moment I realized that the compass rose was a D-pad.
Yeah. So all that was just came from that idea, right? So like I knew I wanted the puzzle to be, or the solution to be, you started on one word, you did like the contra code in the deep into the thing, and then like another word showed up. And so I was just like, what facilitates that the most interestingly, or in an interesting way? And so that's where the map comes from. That's where the journey comes from. And it's like, oh, I could have this thing where you're reading a book and you're figuring out the path on a map, and then you have to transcribe that map, and that's your sequence of inputs, and then like the clues all stem from that, with the compass rose being the D-pad, and you just figure out a way to like get there. Same thing with like the math room was like, I was like, oh, it'd be cool if instead of typing a word, you were typing numbers like boob on a calculator, and like that was the genesis of that puzzle. And so I was just like, what do I need to do to facilitate that? You know, do I need to do to get the player into that direction? And so it just becomes like a ton of planning on that side of things and figuring out that.
I don't think I even noticed this before, but the internal back cover of the Journey book is just a D-pad.
Yeah, it might be a little bit on the nose, but I cut it and put it back and cut it and put it back. It seems.
Yeah, I think I just bulldozed right past it and didn't even notice it. Because I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm out of words. But then I saw the compass rose at least. There's a lot of little details. Yeah, it is kind of all over the place, isn't it? Because there's like just based on what you're used to from puzzles, like you definitely, like I definitely recognize we're gonna go this many spaces in these directions on a map puzzle, but then the input was not something I saw coming at all. But you definitely avoid a lot of the, and I guess that's just level of exposure to some extent, but like from my perspective, you avoid what Rock Paper Shotgun calls like the elder puzzles. Like here's lights out, here's the the 3 buckets of water, and here's a sliding tile puzzle and stuff and so on. But then that one guy in the comments, he probably thinks this game's all elder puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, I think the genre of puzzle, it does avoid a lot of those sort of more tropier feeling puzzles, like you're saying. But yeah, from
the puzzles you'll see in a BioWare game or a Resident Evil game without fail.
Yes, I actually tried to do the Resident Evil, like the flower room is sort of the Resident Evil, like put the sliders in the right position puzzle, but trying to like recontextualize it into one of these style puzzles. So like once you do that though, once you've recontextualized those elder puzzles into this, they kind of like lose all relationship to those original style puzzles, because it's so different when you're trying to clue a word. I think that's the main difference, right? Is that all those puzzles are just basically turn a thing on, right? You're just trying to get to the finished position.
It's like the idea that like if Towers of Hanoi was in here, solving Towers of Hanoi wouldn't make the door open because the input isn't Towers of Hanoi.
Right. So once you try to like convert some kind of action into a word, that's when things have to get interesting, because it becomes a lot harder challenge from a design perspective to key in a word. And I would think that's kind of where a lot of these ideas come from, is like, well, how do I get a word out? You know, how do you extract, which is the terminology, the extraction. How do you extract a word from something? And then, you know, how can I help the player along? I'd say another thing when it comes to puzzles, at least the way I look at it, I don't know if this is what other people do, but something I constantly think about is, what do I know for certain that the player knows or the player thinks they know? And then how can I use that against them? So that's
use their own assumptions.
Yeah. So that's something I constantly try to like keep in mind. So I'm like, at any point during I'm designing a puzzle, I'm like, what do I know the player is thinking for sure? Or what can I be almost certain that the player is thinking? And then how can I use that against them? And then how do I incorporate that into the design? And so,
depending on the genre, it's like the classic loop is you walk into a room and you're like, well, this is impossible, but it can't be impossible. So what am I wrong about? And you just sort of stare at it for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I can't think of any real instances of that here, but I know I know they exist.
Yeah. It often comes up a bit more in like obviously the Sokoban style puzzles, but also like Portal and more like environmental interacty kind of ones. But this is a bit, I would definitely equate this game somewhat more in the Myst direction, where you're trying to make observations and you're exploring, and then you're kind of sort of decoding the logic of your environment, because the actual puzzle, like sometimes finding what the puzzle is and what the steps involved is like the majority of the solution as well.
Right. And that kind of flies in the face. Like that was the other ethos of the game, is there's this, I forget who said it, but some puzzle designer wrote a book and said like, good puzzle design is not about the what to do, it's about the how to do. And I was like, what if the puzzles were about the what to do? And so that's kind of what is going on here too. It's like once you know the puzzle is kind of like you're looking at something, you're like, I don't know what to do with this, but once you know what to do with it, you're like, oh, I get it, and then you just do it. Like there's no difficulty between once you kind of get the gist. It's not going to take you a long time to get the answer, right? You don't then have to do Towers of Hanoi. You know what I mean? Like you just like, oh, I got the word, and you just put it in, right? Putting in the word is not the hard part. It's figuring out.
There's a certain thing that stuck with me, which I think this is an Ego Raptor video or something, but there's just that argument of like the idea of like, yeah, I get it. And like the time between the yeah, I get it moment and the solution being drawn out too much can just be agony when you're like, no, but I get it. And sometimes it's just an execution thing, depending on what genre the game is. Like it stretches beyond puzzle into like entirely other genres, but it can be deeply frustrating if you understand the entire logic of the puzzle and you see where it is and you see the solution, and then for some reason there's like a contrivance that kind of like makes it unfinishable for some reason. And it's often like, oh, I didn't get that I was supposed to like do it in a slightly different location. Like that sometimes it's like a miscommunication almost. I gotta ask, what's up with this very suspicious indentation in the shadow that I noticed at one point?
There used to be a door there, it just never got removed. The indentation never got removed.
Because boy, I spent like an hour looking for a secret ending tied to that off camera when I finished the series. I'm like, there's got to be is there a secret good ending tied to this weird like Beetlejuice door in the shadows?
I did use it for something, but it did for like there was an event that MM put on where they wanted people to like hide secrets in their games, or not necessarily hide the secret in their game, but I did anyways. And I did use it there. But it was like a temporary thing. I should just delete that door, but I think the intrigue, I don't know. I'm somewhat tied to having that door there and having people like do what you did, even though that seems somewhat mean.
it happened. Like the sometimes there's doors you cannot open. What is it?
That's a big pet peeve of mine, but yes.
Yeah, like Disco Elysium specifically screws with the player on exactly that note. And then there's like items in Souls games that just don't serve any purpose and tell you to your face that they don't do anything, and then people obsess over them for years trying to decode the hidden meaning of the item that tells you outright it doesn't do anything because it must do something. It's in the game. Nothing is in games for no reason.
Yeah, honestly, I should remove that gap. I really truly didn't think people could see it. So it's just one of those things, oversights on my part.
It's the dangerous things where it's a genre that encourages you to scrape over like every detail, which means that the players are going to scrape over every. Like, it drives me crazy when like a AAA company makes this exploration based game that's all about going into like the computers and the notes and looking at the environmental storytelling, like in Fallout and so on, and then they just have like things in the environment where like you can see the text, and the text is somebody mashing their hand on the keyboard, and it's just like a poster on the wall, and it's like, you encouraged me to look closely at everything, but now I'm just seeing all the seams.
Right.
But yeah, if you leave something like that in, people are totally going to fixate on it because they've been encouraged to be like, what if this pipe means something? And it's obviously it's completely okay for things to be pointless, but I'm really confused when there's like environmental storytelling games that like encourage you to look closely and then have stuff that almost punishes you for looking closely because it's like incomplete documents and so on scattered around the environment. But that's a whole other topic. Let's see. Christine Habeck says tips on making puzzle games, and especially on tying the puzzles to a story in a satisfying way.
Oh man, I don't have any tips on tying puzzles to a story because that is not what I did here. I had the puzzles pretty much. I had the puzzles made like way before I knew what the story was going to be about, and the story went through a bunch of rewrites, and I eventually had somebody else write the story, like take what I had outlined multiple times and like kind of refine it into something more interesting, and then we kind of just tacked it on.
So it's kind of like a No Man's Sky and Subnautica sort of situation where like you figure out the gameplay first, then you just kind of try to graft a story on because people kind of expect a narrative.
I always wanted there to be a narrative because I feel like it's this most satisfying way to end. Like, it's very hard to make a satisfying end to a game that doesn't have a narrative. Like, I mean, at least I don't think it's easy, especially in a game like this. Like, what could you do?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say. Like, if you focused enough on trying to make a mechanical ending to a game with no intentional narrative, I feel like you'd end up telling more of a story thematically through the mechanics to the point where it would end up just feeling like a story was there anyway. Like, I don't know if you can escape having like some kind of narrative ending in order to feel like it didn't just run out of levels.
Yeah, I think it would just if you just end, it would just feel like it just ended. You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, I guess I finished. Like, and so that's I think I did have a much like lighter version of the story, whereas like you just got out of the simulation and then you walked off and then that was it. You know, you're just done. And then I was having a conversation with somebody and they're like, you should just do a really negative ending, and then a really dark ending, and even if it's not a good ending or even like a well told ending, if it's emotional enough, it'll feel like an ending. And so I kind of took that to heart. I just like wanted to have something that hit hard enough that when you were finished, you were like, okay, I feel like I'm done. And it doesn't have this lingering sense of like it ran out of steam. And so that's kind of where the story came from, was we just wanted to facilitate that ending, and we kind of backfilled in the narrative to make that work. And so that's where a lot of the all the dialogue and the AI and all that stuff comes from, is just how do we make that ending make sense, where we want to do this kind of Black Mirror, oh, the guy was dead the whole time sort of thing, I mean, as cliche as it is.
Hey, you turn out the lights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that even without the narrative context, that you essentially introduce like itches throughout the game in a Metroidvania sort of way, where it's just like, I can't access that, but there wouldn't just be like a floating fence with like a book on it that just is that wouldn't be like the weird, I guess it's a little similar to the dark doorway, but like it wouldn't be there for no reason, right? There's got to be like some sort of context. But then you're in this game where like you don't interact with the environment most of the time, so you're like genuinely can't process what you would do to solve the fact that there is a fence in the middle of the ocean with a book on it. And you're like, I guess it'll just have to come up later. But those kind of I feel like that kind of like setup and payoff, where you keep setting up these like questions and these like sort of like things that keep sort of like gnawing at the back of your mind, and then finally you get an answer hours later. Like that kind of probably like adds structure to these things even without the narrative itself, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's important when you're designing a puzzle game to have at least some of those like hooks, so that way there's always something, because you're always going to have discrete puzzles, right, that like kind of solve by themselves in a vacuum. But to keep the player engaged, I feel like you definitely need those itches. You need a lot of things. The more things you can do to like make the player think, well, there's something else I could be doing, I think is really good for puzzle games, because the thing you can't control in a puzzle game is the difficulty, because I am of the opinion that difficulty in games is like almost completely random when you consider like the skill, the variance in player skill. Like,
oh yeah,
some people are just, especially even in like a non-puzzle game, like the difficulty is almost random, because some people are really good at playing games and some people aren't. And
or
so
even
puzzle
just have
games just
weirdly
kinda,
specific skills. Like you'll agonize over like a Bloodborne boss for like a weekend, and then somebody else will just button mash through it, and you're like, I didn't even know that was an option, that you could just be like right. dumbly aggressive and the guy will just collapse.
Yeah, that's why any conversation around difficulty in games has like always been mind numbing for me, because it's like there is no such thing. Like, you cannot account for,
at least not like a measurable thing, like no standard.
Yeah, there's no like universal thing. You can't just say like, oh, this game is too hard, or oh, this game is too easy. I think the best you can do is like give players the ability to like scale it to what they want, but I don't even know if it just seems like such a challenge. So I don't think there's like a real easy fix. So just like making the game easier or making the game harder is just not a realistic sort of answer. but I think it's doubly so in a puzzle game because now you're talking about just the ability to like even understand what is happening. Like it's not even like, oh, I know there's this jump and I just can't make the jump. It's like I don't even know what to do in this room. And so in a puzzle game, when you're designing it, I feel like it's very, very important that you give the player enough different things to do or to think about, even if it's not another whole, like, even if it's not a completely other puzzle that they can solve. It's at least these other ideas or these other things that they can look at and consider to make it feel like they're not just stuck on one thing. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
If you're literally just like in a, you just have the one level and you just got to solve it to move to the next, and you get stuck, then the player just has nothing to do, right? They're just stuck. They're just looking at that one thing.
Especially at the beginning, right? Because like I feel like the opening hour of a lot of puzzle games is sometimes the hardest, just because you don't even really understand yet for sure, unless you just have seen something like that's a carbon copy of that game. You don't necessarily even understand yet what a solution looks like, and there's like
right.
I think I somewhat infamously took until like the third room I opened to then. Like I got into this flower room and then cracked it pretty much in one sitting, and then suddenly like I had like a more sharp understanding of what solving a puzzle looks like in this game, and then can snap back into like and have a better idea of before. Whereas like you definitely just start grasping in all sorts of directions, and to some extent it's exciting to just not really know what matters yet. And there's the next puzzle game that people will see this next week has a similar thing where it's got that sort of curve where you don't really know, like, do I need to gain access to stuff later, or do I have everything in front of me, and like what is the formula there, I suppose. Let's see.
Sorry, got interrupted.
You know, that was just a mess. That wasn't even a question. It was just like trailing.
Well, I mean, I think it was in speaking specifically with this game, it was very important to me to have like the first floor, like you get one key and it can unlock 2 doors, right? And then it doesn't really matter which door you unlock because there's another key inside whichever route you go to unlock the other one. And so it was kind of, I was trying to give the player 3 very different puzzles from a solution standpoint that would, like in the hopes that one of them would do what it did to you, where it's like, okay, I don't get these 2, but this one I get, and then in getting that one I kind of understand the game. You know what I mean? And so like trying to give the player at least 3 looks at that sort of thing, and then giving them the small, and like the keys, I could have not had the keys and just have all the doors open, you know? And so it's very important to give, the reason they exist is just to give the player that sense of progression, that sense of like, well, I could go use this key if I'm stuck, you know? And just giving them those little moments that don't really matter too much from a structure standpoint. Like it doesn't like break the game for them to use all the keys first, let's say, but it does give the player like multiple things to do. And so I really didn't want people to like get stuck on the first puzzle and bounce off. Although interestingly enough, like if you look at the stats, because I have stats on the game tracking like how far people get, and like the majority of people don't even open up the door to the house. So
I don't, this is a conspiracy thing in my head to some extent, but like there's a whole thing to get into about like what analytics are on any platform, and like what is the average person's behavior like? How often do they bounce off of so many different things, I wonder? Because yeah, like any YouTuber will tell you that like 50% of their audience is gone in the first 30 seconds of any video, no matter what the context or the clickbaitiness or the duration. Like people are just clicking on stuff and then leaving immediately. And you get your access to your PlayStation trophies that have their percentage stats, and you're like, wow, well, 80% of people beat the first level, and then like 30% of people beat the second level, and this game has 20 levels, and it's like you start wondering just what are the habits of your average like game player, I suppose, and so on. Because yeah, it's really easy to get demoralized by that stuff, but then you realize that everything seems to have the same problem, and it just really makes you wonder how rapidly people click in and out of things.
I think there's some kind of thing where it's like, and this is just completely not informed enough to actually be true, but I think there's something like, 50% of people just, the content is just not for them, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's just not.
because you're in a wider storefront of like a bunch of free games that are kind of designed around the idea of just kind of just like no barrier to entry. Just click download or click start and just try it.
Right. I will say that there is that gap, right? The 50% just bounce off right away, but then there's like the amount of 100% versus the rest of the pack, I think I don't know the exact percentage anymore, but it was like quite high. Like most people who continue finish, which I think is a good, like I'm okay with like 50% bounce if like the next 20% finish.
It's very encouraging if your
metric,
engagement just flattens out immediately and you just stop losing people.
I've definitely seen that with people who play.
That means people are happy.
Yeah, I found I accidentally made a good game. The whole through development, I was like, I think I'm making like a game that nobody's gonna enjoy.
Dude, creating is weird. You get so deep in this thing where you have this there's the sunk cost aspect where you just like you feel like you got to keep going because you're so invested, but because you know so much of the ins and outs of the thing, and you know how you made it in a way that kind of makes you feel like a fraud, and then by the time you finish something, there's this aspect of like kind of hating it and just kind of wanting to like finish the thing for the sake of finishing it, and then you almost need distance afterwards to process whether or not it was good, and sometimes you just need like 100 people to answer it for you because you don't know what to do with that.
Right. Like the whole point of me making this game was, to make that on-ramp for this genre. And so I knew I was going to finish, but I definitely had that feeling like you're saying.
Yeah.
I had like 5 months left to go, and I was just like, man, I hate this thing. I do not want to open this or look at this ever.
When I was in my Annihilation video, I just resented it by the end, and I would there's glaring issues that I was mad about, and like there's several production problems that came up along the way. Like I had camera footage of myself the whole time speaking, for example, and had to just cut all of that because none of it worked out. And then like a week later, I check in with Colonel RPG, and he's like, "Yeah, I already watched it 3 times." I'm like, "What?" I don't know what to do with that information. By the way, he kind of apologizes for getting in a stupid semantic argument with you about what satire is.
I wasn't trying to start an argument. I was just like, no, I'm pretty sure that's what I was doing.
He was arguing. He was being a person. He's my one of my podcast co-hosts, and I'm like, "What are you doing? You're gonna scare him off. Why is this happening?" To the point where other people were calling him out. Comment sections, they were a mistake. Let's see. Yeah,
I didn't. That was not my intention. I was just like, I think I was writing satire.
Yeah,
he definitely made me second guess it. I was like, wait, did I not do that? Did I do something else?
Questioning what word. Yeah, we had I don't remember. God, it was probably like 1 or 2 or 3 episodes ago, but we did have a little debate of sorts about what satire versus parody means.
Yeah,
and that's I don't remember how it related to the book in this game necessarily, but I think I came down to the idea that just like parody has to use the means of the original thing. Like it's like a stylistic, like parody is like the co-opting of the style of the thing and working within that. Otherwise, because like you never have a parody that is like a different medium than the thing it's parodying, for example. But it's just it's at the end of the day, it's like it's semantics. It's like one of our hours-long arguments about what an RPG is, and no one agrees with me on that either. But
I think the point here was just to say ridiculous things in as earnest a way as, like, not earnest, I guess, but like without saying that they were ridiculous. You know what I mean?
You wrote a book about animals from the point of view of an asshole that didn't seem to know that much about the animals.
Well, there's also some like light social commentary going on there.
A little I am not a wolf going on.
Sort of.
I do. It's not super related to this book, this game, I suppose. But on the topic of like narrative in puzzle games, I did notice like because I started doing like a continual coverage of puzzle games end to end, and I was obviously like familiar with like Portal and Talos Principle and so on. I noticed what was kind of like the trope for that kind of stuff is like you have a voiceover character that usually is secretly the bad guy that starts talking to you at the beginning of the game, and then over the course of the game you realize that they're actually the villain, and then at the end of the game you defeat them and they were lying to you about like the basic facts of your reality or someone. There's definitely something different going on here because in this case the voice is you, if I remember correctly, essentially, or like an iteration of you. Or actually I guess I didn't question this necessarily, whether the player was in any way related to the voiceover that's been repeating endlessly, because the voice is the guy that's in the ending, right?
Yeah, so I knew that. So I think part of the reason why that's kind of the trope is because it's very hard to have it like actual character if you're trying to make a game cheaply, or in this case like by yourself in like a platform that's, you know, the way it is. You kind of have to cut that corner of like having actual characters, and so doing voiceovers is generally, you know, the route you like. If you want to have story, that's like the route you have to go. I guess some games do it with like, you know, you find a document and you read it. But so I think that's why that trope exists, and that's partially why it is here. I was trying to do a different thing here. I didn't want to have the voice be the antagonist. I wanted the voice to help propel you forward from I wanted it to give you some kind of motivation. Because again, the thing with puzzle games is, you know, you get stuck and then you just stop, right? So I wanted to make sure that there was enough avenues to keep the player going. And then basically every character in the game is this person. So the character you're playing, the voice, the AI, it's all the same entity. That was the kind of the gist of the
echoes of one person interacting with themselves.
Yeah, over and over again.
Yeah,
so,
I used to rally against it a little bit, maybe just because of the part of like the brain that just like, I recognize a trope and that means it's bad because it's repeating, and any trend I can observe is a sign of unoriginality or whatever. But then like the more I play puzzle games, the more I realize like, how else do you do a narrative necessarily? Just because like I guess you could be like, there's somebody at the end of all this and I have to solve my way to like saving them in some way, like an Ico sort of way. But by and large, if you're doing like a series of puzzle chambers, it definitely feels like one of the most effective things is being like, here's some sort of status quo, or here's some sort of like thing we're gonna tell you what's happening. Then here's the Ratman text that indicates that something's wrong with this world, and then you realize like there's something deeper going on, and now I gotta dig, and it's like, well, that's perfectly. It's like, it's your, what do they call it? Like, it's like ludonarrative synergy or whatever, where it's like, that's the that's the gameplay. Like the point is to want to dig deeper and observe everything and find out what's really going on with the puzzles. So making a story that's also like that just complements that. So it's like, I kind of came to terms with like watching the same thing happen in different ways, and instead just appreciating the way the games do differently. Because asking for a completely different narrative style in a puzzle game is almost like counterintuitive to like the genre of what they are. It's like acting for an action game to not have a violent story.
Right. I think it would definitely change the type of game you can make. Right. If you wanted to have a different, like if you wanted to have multiple characters like interacting, like say like a more cinematic style game would, like a more AAA cinematic game, like a God of War, let's say, where there's, you know, physical characters and they're interacting and they have issues and point of views and all that. And then you wanted to do that in a puzzle game. I think you have to make a fundamentally different type of puzzle game. Like, I'm not sure that you could, I mean, you could do it. You could just shoehorn that in. But I think in order for it to be successful, it'd have to be like tied into what you're making, and it couldn't just be, you know, layered on top. And I think that's the advantage of just having the audio, is you can just layer it on top without it really worming its way too far into like the design and forcing you into a different type of game than you wanted to make in the first place. And so I think that's why some puzzle games just don't even have story, you know, like a good snowman is hard to build. There's sort of a story, but it's just like, you're just kind of doing the snowman thing.
Yeah, know? I guess Snowman and Monster are both examples a little bit of the idea of like trying to come up with like an ending without a story. Because they both, I haven't played Snowman yet, but I've played Monster, and there's definitely just like, you kind of just have to visually like you have to like visually display an ending visual, essentially, like some kind of departure or escape or finale that doesn't necessarily have much of a narrative. Because in particular, like as far as I can tell from Monsters Expedition, there's also no stakes narratively. It's just you're
Right.
here and then you leave, and
I
they
think
just need
that's
to
fine.
display that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tropes are useful, I think.
Oh yeah.
Like I use tropes here, like the fact that because I'm trying to do a very different thing puzzle wise, you know, that's why it's on an island and all that, because that's why it's kind of presented as an escape room. Because if I had just tried to present this as like a puzzle hunt in like a non-familiar sort of environment, or like in a non-familiar sort of way, I think I would have heard it, you know.
There's just something like so straightforward, satisfying about just the simple fact of like just opening a door. Like it's kind of like
Exactly.
it's almost like unnecessary to like reinvent. Like they use it in Resident Evil and Dark Souls and so on for similar reasons. And
Yeah,
yeah,
so
like,
it's just
and like what, like the narrative stuff, like I realize eventually that like what, like the this is not what it seems is baked into like the origins. Like I like missed all the way back in like 19
Yeah.
what 92 4 or something. It's like, oh, find the blue pages, find the red pages, and they're like, oh, that I don't think that this narrative is what these people are telling me. Is like we've
Right.
never gone beyond it because it's just it fits too perfectly, and attempted replacements are just kind of messy.
Well, yeah, if your story is just two and then, you know what I mean? Like if your story is just like this happens and then this happens and then this happens, then it's like, why even have the story? Because there's no,
Yeah.
it's just predictable, and there's no real revelation or learning, or you're not saying anything with it or anything, you know. It's just there to be there. And so if you didn't make a story that had like some kind of twist, or some, not a twist, maybe not be the right word, but some kind of like, it wasn't telling you everything, or there's some revelation to it, or there's some upset, let's say, then it's like, don't even have it, I think.
Oh yeah. There's something really, it's dangerous to keep listing games, I guess, but there's definitely just something seductive about a game just lying to you for a while and then revealing the way it was lying to you, and kind of like letting you in on some of the clues of how you might have even picked up on that a little bit. Like what is it? I just can't name the game. That's dangerous. But like I played a game that was like 2 hours long recently, where the entire second hour is them revealing that they lied to you for the entire first hour, and that's just like a basic structural deception that they put in, and it's like it keeps repeating, but it just works. Because yeah, like as much as it's like, you can see a direct through line between like certain elements of like Mist and Portal and Lock and so on, in that kind of like the kind of like reveal of like what was actually happening. When you see puzzle games that try to have a story but they don't go into that formula, you have a lot more trouble even remembering what happened at all, because
Story just
is flat.
Is like flat. Yeah, I think it also suffers directly because, you know, as a player, you don't have like agency over the story as much, and then like you're usually interacting or like non-interacting with a person talking, and so like I think that kind of funnels the story definitely down that route. Whereas if you had, you know, 3 characters and they all had their own goals, then your story can take on a new form, right? Because it becomes
once you have multiple characters, that just means you have multiple endings.
Yeah. Or you just have you have a different style of conflict. Like, what's the conflict when the player can't speak and there's only a character talking to you? Like, the only conflict is the character talking to you is not saying everything that they should be saying, right? It's I can't really think of how you mix that up too much. I think I tried a little bit here, which was, you know, the character's not necessarily evil or bad. It's just that there is no other characters. Like, it's just the one guy. And so like that's the revelation, is that, and I don't really address it too much with like that the player you're playing as is the same guy. You know, like I don't ever really state that directly, but that's the intention. So like I think that was a clever-ish, I guess, mix-up of the formula, but it really still plays out mostly the same, where the first half you're being told one thing and then the second half it's another. So
makes me think a bit of it reminds me of Andy Weir's The Egg. Have you read that?
No, I haven't read that one yet. I've read his other books though.
It's a very short story, like a single, not a single page, but like single. It's just all on like one web page, and it's less about reveals and more about just this idea, this idea that like every single person on the planet is actually just the same person, and so you live and you die, and then you every time you die, you have this conversation with sort of God about what your purpose is and what all this is. Then you can essentially just go right back into another life, not remembering any of that context, and live again. But eventually you live every life that ever existed on Earth from front to back, because they all were you all along, and the planet's an egg. Like, that's the title essentially.
That's distressing.
Oh, it's horrifying and uplifting, and for very different reasons. Like, it's just a bizarre concept to process, but I think it was supposed to be the idea of like, that's how deities are born, is that they live this infinite spectrum of lives and the entire planet's one organism and so on. But it's just I thought about that a little bit, just in the idea that like, like you're playing this character with agency, trying to solve these puzzles and so on, while simultaneously a copy of you is talking to you. And it could be these are just split personalities of the same guy simultaneously, but it could also just be that they're like people at different stages of this like looping, because he's been hooked in for thousands of years or something like that. Right. Because you have like the puzzle solver, you have the confused narrator, and you have the sort of the tyrant AI character, which are all kind of fast as the same person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's you definitely leave it ambiguous on how to interpret some of that.
Yeah, I think if you spelled it out too much, it just like kind of falls apart a little bit. Like, players are much better at filling in the gaps, like in a more satisfying way than I could be.
This is a clever reference to an Andy Weir short story.
Exactly. Perfect. Exactly what I intended.
Let's see.
But I think somebody in the comments did the math. Like, there's a scene at the end where it tells like how many runs he's done, and somebody did the math and was like, "This doesn't make sense." And I was like, "Yes, I did not do the math."
Was it like some Heat, Death of the Universe stuff?
Yeah, sort of. Like the sun would be burned down.
Whoops. Let's see. Ellie or LW asks, "What is your favorite puzzle and favorite narrative part of making Locke?"
Oh. Narratively, like, it's just the ending, really, because like when we hit upon the ending, I knew that was what we were going to do, and it just felt like it buttoned up the whole game in a good way, and so everything else was just to support that. But from a puzzle perspective, it's got to be using the title. Like, huge spoilers, but like,
that was pretty good.
Hitting on that early on was like, this changes, like, this makes the game make sense. Like, the fact that the name of the game, the way it's presented, like what you're doing, like it like connects the dots so hard in a way that I feel like puzzle games really need to do. Is they really, it gives purpose to so many of the elements of the game. Like, why is the puzzle this way? Why is the panel this way? Why is the input this way? And like, making that be something you reveal, really, not only is it just a cool reveal and doing something that I feel like is sort of fresh in the genre, it does just make the whole game like click in a better way than if it didn't exist.
Yeah, I feel bad for not mentioning that earlier when I listed my like the big reveals. I was like, oh yeah, the eyes and the rooms, but like I completely blanked on the title thing. That was just fantastic. That was like a Baba Is You style moment where it's like, I didn't you're any kind of puzzle that makes you question what was possible in the first place is a great moment where you're like, I didn't think that this was on the table. Like, let's go back to the main menu and type in a different word is just fantastic. Yeah.
And it just like, I wanted so badly for the word you type in to be exit. But because of the way the puzzles work and the constraints involved, it was just not possible. Like, because of how I wanted the last puzzle to be and all that stuff. It was just very difficult to like, almost, it was next to impossible to make exit work. So hitting on aisle was pretty good. It contextualizes the story in a nice way. But yeah, I have lots of screenshots There's lots of screenshots that people have posted of them renaming the game to all the words you'd imagine.
Oh yeah, 4-letter words.
Yeah, that's fair.
You dug your own hole there.
Yeah, I knew that was gonna happen. Like people act like they're like I already knew that was gonna happen.
You just know that if there was enough press about this game, there'd be the one really angry Zero Escape style review where he renames the game as being shit and then puts that as his like banner of the review or whatever.
Yeah.
Just sneak it right in there.
Yeah.
But then it just becomes a meme form, man. That's just better press. That's just free marketing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that makes making a sequel to this very difficult because it's like, oh man, I don't know if I'm smart enough to do that again, like in a way that's just as satisfying. Because I can't just do that again, you know, that same thing. I have to do something.
And then you're wondering like, how do you do something that clever without doing the same thing again? And is there even like another category of that? Like, it'd have to be based on whatever the puzzle is, I guess. Like the
for me,
input.
it's less about the fact that people don't expect the title to be a puzzle. It's more about how it like clicks the whole game together, you know, how it connects all the dots. And so I don't need it to be some cool meta thing like that. I just need it to do the other thing. I just need it to contextualize the game in a really nice way that makes it, you know, like I said, like, oh, that's why things are the way they are. Even if you don't, as a player, like realize that, I think that's why it feels good. You know, I think that's why when you hit upon it, you're like, oh, the font's the same, the input's the same, it's 4-letter word title, like all those things, like it makes it come together in a way that feels like
it's like the mechanical moment that makes the whole game not feel like it's just and then this happened and then this happened,
right? Or
because
arbitrary,
it ties all of it together. Oh, these close when you leave.
Yeah, I didn't save that. Making things save state in Dreams is kind of a tedious affair. So anything that I could just give up, I just gave up. Like making sure the doors stayed open and all that stuff was really obnoxious to do. Making sure
like saving what doors you've opened so far.
Yeah, there's no universal save system in Dreams. Like, oh, save the state of the game. Like every single thing has to be like controlled, like all the inputs on the panels, like the words you type, I have to like store that in the variable and keep that on hand, so that way when you load the game up, like when you first open the game for like a brief couple frames, like the game is in its initial state and then it goes through and like redoes everything you did. So that's kind of an awkward thing. Like there's no flag that permanently sets something. You had to
develop in really specific constraints here, because like doesn't the game essentially load everything on the title screen?
Yeah, but Dreams is very fast at loading. Like the way the game is, like Dreams is like a really weird system where what it's saving, like when you save a dream and you make something, what it's saving is a list of instructions to remake what you made. So if you made like a model the car, let's say, it doesn't actually save the car into the file. It saves the steps you took to make the car. And then when it loads the game, it just remakes the car on the fly. And that's what it does. So like everything you do, all it's saving is like the instructions to make it. And so when the game, and apparently that's faster and easier than saving the thing itself. So the file size for the games becomes very, very tiny, right? And so that way, when you open up the game, it loads like super quick. And so it's just
it's like some hyper complicated version of like when something replays your brush strokes, I guess. Basically,
that's what it's doing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just nuts to think about. That seems like it'd be wildly less useful to do it that way. But apparently it just works better.
Yeah, I mean, it makes because it's just an instruction list, like the amount of what needs to be saved is just a lot less, I guess. And so the trick becomes, you know, optimizing how it creates everything, I suppose. And so that way it can make it as fast as possible, you know, without any errors or whatever. But Lock is one of the longer loading games I've seen.
Because it's just so fast across the board.
Yeah, like most games are instant.
It makes me wonder, like how much can you like import things from the outside versus how much do you have
Just
to like
audio.
create everything inside of, so only audio, so all the visuals are made inside of Dreams.
Correct. But like sculpting in Dreams, I think is one of the more fun things to do. Like it's very
Do you have
it's
to
very
use a
different than what
controller?
you yeah, or you can use the moves, but I almost exclusively use the controller because it's pretty painless once you get it still has that same curve of like if you've never played Minecraft, let's say forever and ever before, like you still have to learn like how to like move around and
Like
manipulate
Minecraft or
the
like
world.
scrap mechanic, like just that kind of
but
like
once you
tactile crafting.
Yeah, once you got over that hurdle though, like the actual using everything is pretty intuitive, and like probably the best part about it, it's like you just have to, it maybe take you a week or so to get through that kind of like, I just don't get the control scheme of being in the space. But then after that,
does a keyboard and mouse
easy.
like never come into play?
No.
Like at any point?
I actually think I'm of the opinion that because of the way it's designed, like keyboard and mouse would be worse than using the controller. Like they would have to like change some of the interface elements to make keyboard and mouse like work, in my opinion. I know that some people would disagree with that, but it just feels like it's so designed for the controller that
Yeah,
you wouldn't really want to use a different thing because you're like holding like lots. I mean, like keyboard has lots of buttons, but it just feels more natural.
I'm just like calibrating expectations a bit and kind of like if when you're a complete outsider, it's like you just don't know what to expect from this, or like what it would even be like. And so it's really interesting to find out that like it's like a way more complicated version of like making a forge map in Halo or something, like as opposed to like I almost imagined like there being like file sharing elements and like the ability to model things on your computer and upload that in, and then like having to like code with your keyboard and things, like because you just imagine that's what game development is.
Yeah, this is very different than what you normally would do. Like the logic systems are all like gadgets that you just place on the screen that do a thing, and then you just wire everything up more like a circuitry than like programming. It's a lot more like circuitry than programming. So it does make some things easier and does make some things harder. It's really weird how that works out. Like things that would be very simple in like a programming language are very tedious in this, but then there are other things that would be incredibly complex that take you 2 seconds. Where you just like drop two things,
like human resource machine, like a Zachtronics, here's coding through the filter of a puzzle game sort of feel.
It does. I mean, when I first started doing it, I did have this fear of like, oh no, I can't. This is gonna be too hard to. Like the control scheme was so hard to, like, I wouldn't say hard to pick up, but alien, that I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to stick with it. But then like I just spent a week, doing it, and then you just pick it up, and now I'm like I in it. I don't even notice. You know what I mean? Like I don't even notice what I'm doing. I'm just doing the things I want to do.
So if you make the leap to Unity, that I assume that means recreating all the assets then from scratch.
Yeah, but I have other people doing that.
Yeah. I was wondering about that because I was like, when you mentioned that the trees and so on were made by other people, it made me think about like, oh, how does rights work then? But then I'm like, if it's all made on a controller in a PS4 game, I don't think you can take any of this out of it. So you just have to start over, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we have to start over. But that does give us the ability to like not be hampered by the limits and make the graphics look more like what I would really want them to be. Not that I hate the way this looks. I think this looks fine. It just does have some heavy limitations based off the platform.
You might say it looks a little dream-like.
Yeah, it does have that dreamsy feel, but in some ways that's an asset. Like for most people, like because jumping to Unity, I've noticed that like making things look good takes longer, right? With Dreams, because it gives you these soft kind of flex and like making something look. Being bad at making things does not keep you from making things look good in Dreams. Mm-hmm. Like in like Unity or in Blender or whatever, if you're bad at making things look good, it's gonna look bad. Like they don't help you. Like Dreams does like a lot to just help you out of the box.
Self-moderating art style.
Yeah, I mean you do get locked into their look if you're not like well versed. Like the more skilled Dreams makers can really make things look beautiful and amazing, and it kind of loses that kind of feel. But I will say that if you just just want to make something, Dreams does goes a long ways to making like it look good out of the box, which I think is something that's easy to take for granted.
I think we're already kind of on this topic anyway, but Paul L asks, what lessons did you learn from the development process of Luck?
Making games is hard. Gosh, I learned so much. I think a lot of it is just you can make all the assumptions or think you know a lot about what things need to be or need to do, and there's just no way to know for sure until people actually play what you've done. Like, it's impossible to be correct the first time. Like, you have to build and try and build and try. And when it comes to puzzles, I think that's doubly so.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Because like when you're making a puzzle, you know the solution, so it's hard to solve your own puzzle and know how solvable it is or what that'd be like.
Right, and especially like these type of puzzles, like there is just no possible way for me to know how hard something is with these type of puzzles, like because I get the puzzle, like I have the most intimate understanding of these puzzles, and so like this puzzle, like the room you're in now, the game room, like I thought was like the easiest puzzle in the game, and it turns out to be like the hardest puzzle for most people.
You saw me make all these deranged connections where I'm like going back downstairs to that other book and thinking that some of these are like codes.
Like there is so many ways to mess this up, like internally. Yeah. Like you can just overcomplicate it or just not look at the right things. Like
it's hard to get the hangman wrong.
I've seen people just like not even look at the hangman, like not even like consider it to be like a thing, or they'll be like, oh, it's tattoo. Well, that doesn't help me. And then they move on. And I'm just like, man, like there's so many.
Just drawing the strange, like I remember looking at these two and drawing a connection that in both cases red was winning. And I'm like,
yeah, that's happened a lot.
So I'm like, what's the color?
Yeah, it's so. Like I thought it was pretty straightforward, but like,
oh right, I've got you. I can ask you what's Bovretta?
I don't know. I pulled these from somebody else's things.
Okay. Damn it. Yeah, because there's really obvious analogs of what most of these are, and this one's just a joke. But I have no idea what Bovretta is, and with some of these being such base level references, not getting one of them is really weird.
This was one of the things where I toyed with like just cutting the game boxes altogether because I felt like they were really distracting. But then like cutting them immediately made the room look bad.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those instances of like how much decoration can I do? And like I just left them. I don't know. Again, one of those choices where I'm not sure what the right answer is.
Mm-hmm. There's like an aspect almost too, like I'd imagine there's like a level of like getting it done and making your calls, and then afterwards having way more scrutiny than you might have expected when it kind of took off.
Oh yeah, I'm just glad that most people end up liking it because I know all the warts, I know all the ups and downs of people. I know which puzzles are really bad, like, and I just like the chess. I think that chess is probably the most interesting choice because you kind of have to know how to play chess to do those. I mean, you don't really, but you kind of do. And it's just like, was that even a good call? Like, should I have just done something completely different? Because
yeah, like the question of whether or not chess is universal enough, which almost nothing is. Like, you can't even assume people have seen Star Wars. Like, there's no universal culture.
Right, but chess is also like that's a hard thing to learn, I think. So
yeah,
I don't know. That's one of those things where
it's like a thing I can't even question because I just learned what the pieces do when I was like 4 and just have gone through life mostly thinking people just know what they do.
Well, and I just really wanted to have them. Like, yeah. For me, it's like
you just got like attached to the puzzle.
It was the first puzzle I made for the game was the chess puzzle because I thought that's the level of puzzle I was going to make throughout. Like, was this density, the difficulty of it.
They're just easy enough that like I definitely had the reaction of like, God, I don't feel like doing the 5 steps in my mind of how to solve this. But I'm like, that was like a K, and I'm like, it's probably a K, and then I was right. Like, that's enough.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of people who like get the what I'm doing, like they get the point of the puzzle, and then they can just look at the setup and be like,
Yeah.
that has to be this letter. Like they don't figure out the moves. They can just kind of like see.
It's just they only move in so many directions, and that's
Right,
probably
and-
like the place where the fight happens is around here. So looks like a K.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's why ultimately they're okay. I think in the Steam version, what we're going to do is make it so you can move the pieces, and the opposing pieces will react appropriately
And have like a reset button or something.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
like in essence, even if you didn't know how to play, you could trial and error your way into the solution, because everything is like one move away from you losing. So it wouldn't be too hard to like program in like the ability to just trial and error your way through it.
You might even, and if you want to catch everybody, I guess you might even, there might be like a stenography equivalent where you might want to have like just a here's how pieces move in chess book thrown in somewhere in the corner.
I did have that book planned. I just got burnt out, and I was going to put that book in the cave, like just like a chess 101 style book. But then I was like, man, I've already told people they can look stuff up. Just let the go look it up. Like that was this one of the minor objectives with the game, was to make sure that like I wanted people to feel like they were learning things, even if they were like not really important things, like AM and PM and stuff like that. Like I feel like people learn stuff there. And then kind of like I was not afraid of people going and just like Googling certain words just to see what they mean. I mean, that's kind of the ethos of Puzzle Hunt puzzles, is that you do a lot of research understanding what things are.
Hell, I ended up Googling the words in the drawers because I just didn't actually know what AM and PM stood for.
Yeah, most people do. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a great room, actually. The reveal of the, if I remember correctly, the clocks being in the light or dark sides of the room directly affected where they were placed on this timesheet, I think. And that's why it's divided.
If they're in the light, they're in the AM, and if in the dark, they're in the PM, which is somewhat of a contrivance, but I think it ultimately works. Like it helps you with the other clocks that you find later on.
It also makes this a dense room, because like there's the AM and PM realization, so you're like, wow, I just had a room-sized reveal about this place. That's crazy. Bet that won't happen again. In the same room as another reveal waiting for you.
Yeah, I wish more rooms had this kind of density of like things to discover, because I really do like how this room works out, although it is somewhat broken because the clocks don't really like point like real clocks do, because of the way time really works. Like
because the hand for minutes just is always pointing at an interval of 5.
Right. There's no other way to do this puzzle though without doing that, because you're trying to strictly point to like letters. So I kind of have to give that up. But then some people get so hung up on the fact that they want them to work like real clocks that they really mess themselves up in this room and they can't figure it out. And so it's like, oops.
So they see that this minute's almost at 12, so they think that the hour must actually be 6 or something instead of 7.
Exactly.
Right.
And then so they go over to interpret it as the 6 and not the 7. And I'm just like, oh man, I don't know if there's a solution I don't know if there's a way to make that not be a problem. And so I've gotten comments where people said like, oh, this is like the worst puzzle because the clocks don't actually do what they're supposed to do. And I'm like, yep, that's true. There's a lot of that going on where it's like people have like, you should fix this. And I'm like, I tried.
Yeah, Lopez Doria asked, what was the hardest part of making Lock? But I suspect, was that what you were just talking about, was the aspect of trying to get in other people's heads and figuring out how people will react to puzzles that you're making for yourself?
Yeah, just making the puzzles is hard. Like, especially since there's this two layering of them where like the puzzle has to work on its own, and then I have to have this second layer that at least complicates the issue somewhat, or can be expanded upon. So that completely eliminated some puzzles. Like I was like, oh, this is a really good idea for a puzzle. And I'm like, there's no way to do this twice. And so like, I just couldn't do it, And so I think if I made a sequel, I wouldn't have that structure, because that structure puts so many limits on what you can do. Because you're like, oh, I have to be able to hide a tier 2 solution for this in the house and not have it be like breaking anything. Oh, that sounds It just like makes some certain types of puzzles just mind-numbingly impossible.
Like you move one thing and you have to check 12 other things to see if it messed it up.
Yeah, like changing one of the words is like, because the words have that, you put the words in that panel at the top floor to get like the secret messages. So like each word, a couple letters in the word are useful later on. And then the tier 2 solutions also do that. And so changing a word or changing the solution to a different word has like a lot of cascading ramifications that if I change this one word, I have to change like 6 puzzles. It becomes really hard to change anything once you get in certain far down the way. Just not. At some point, I was just like, well, this puzzle's not as good as it could be, but I can't really make it any better without.
When I look at chapter 2 here, it's like so obvious once you know the answer. But have other people made my glaring mistake of trying to apply the credits and forcing the categorization onto it?
No, but I think I liked when you did that. I was like, oh, I should have just done that. That was so much more satisfying because like you could get the answer without even finding the credits answers because you could just like figure out the rest of the word.
Did you end up wondering how you could? Did you end up going back and thinking about how you could have made the credits a puzzle?
Sorry, what? I'm sorry.
Or did you end up going back and like wondering like how you could have made the credits a puzzle?
Yeah, I felt like I should have made those more relevant if I was going to make the player go here. Like I feel like it's a kind of a flat. It ended up falling too flat. I mean, it's nice. It's a nice puzzle, but it's not like the best. I think, yeah, the book has some issues. So this book is something I'm going to address moving forward and making it a little bit more interesting. The best thing the book has going for it, though, is the fact that like I've seen a lot of players, they get halfway through one of the puzzles and they're like, wait a minute, I only really have to solve this one word because I only need that letter because it's got the highlighted letter with the question mark on each page. And so that's one of the moments where I was like, I like that the best about the book is the fact that players assume like, oh, I don't need to solve all of these because I don't need the word. I just need that letter. And I'm like, aha, you're definitely going to need the whole word to solve this book. And so like, that's a good like expectation moment that I built in specifically because I knew people were going to have that thought.
That they could shortcut it.
Yeah, I just need to solve the orange one. I don't need to solve all those. But
this one's a particularly big ask. So you're like, wait, I don't need to look at any of this page. this is one puzzle, not 7.
Yeah, and the that's the thing I love about the crossword puzzle too is the fact that when it tells you that you're supposed to find the one word that's not there, and like, but the answer is like 5 letters long, and you're like, wait a minute, what? I've seen people get really jammed up on that because they're like, wait, but the word's only 4 letters. So how am I supposed to get a 5-letter word off that? So yeah, those things I want to keep, but the puzzles themselves are a little not so good. I probably spent the least amount of time designing those than everything else, which I think is part of the problem.
I guess these are kind of related to each other, but Declan O'Neill asks, do you see Dreams as a viable tool for people looking to get into game development, or is it better at simply raising interest in the profession?
It's definitely good for raising interest. I think it's a good tool to prototype for sure because of the
just low barrier to entry and like low cost.
And the ability to rapidly get something down and test it, right? To see if it's worth pursuing, versus just taking on the brunt of trying to build something in a bigger engine and then realizing that it's not worth doing. I think professionally, it could lead you somewhere. Like, I mean, I'm kind of trying to do something with it, but I think mostly it shouldn't be looked that way. It should be looked at in the sense of just, I want to make something for myself. I want to make something for people to enjoy. It is kind of like a fun thing to do. Making games in it is more fun than making games in anything else. And you don't have to make games. You can make music. You can make animations. It's not just for games, right? So there's other interests you could pursue. I think maybe the most important thing though is that if you do want to go into game development and you don't really know what that's like, Dreams isn't going to be a good analog for the actual like programming or just the kind of minutia of game development, but it is a good analog for how much work there is. I think people kind of underestimate like what it means to make a game. Even I did, like
even when you tell yourself that it's going to be a huge long ordeal, like you still don't appreciate living
you definitely
it.
don't appreciate it until you do it, and then you're like, holy crap, there's like so much work just in like designing it, like after making this, I like have a huge appreciation for what it means to make a game of a certain size. And so I'm just like, I hear people say, oh, I'm going to make an RPG in Dreams. And I'm just like, I hope you have 6 years. Like that's going to take forever, because just like designing it, just like the raw design of it, like figuring it out, not even making anything, is a lot of work. It's a lot more work than I feel like
AAA
it's easy to know.
developers making RPGs are basically still insane people. Like the Western RPG is like the pursuit of an impossible goal of like creating what's essentially tabletop gaming in a video game that can only consist of preordained assets and like paths and like endings and so on.
Right.
Like it's fun to watch just for the insane, absurd ambition of it, but it's also why they basically don't get made anymore.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately why most of them don't succeed, right? It's because it's just like the goal is so far away from being a reality. At least in my opinion, they don't succeed. I know people enjoy a lot of those games. It's just I feel like you end up kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and there's not really much game there, to be honest. But I mean, that's why I made this game too. Is like I knew like making a platformer or making an RPG or making some action-oriented thing was going to require a massive amount of more work than making something that's ultimately like a static thing. If you really think about it, there's not a lot moving, there's not a lot of interaction, there's no characters. It's just mostly static environments. It becomes more important that the design is quality versus the actual things itself.
Might be part of why indie puzzle games are, I think, just continually in a boom for like the last decade, basically. Is that like there's a very different barrier to entry. Like if you're trying to make a Souls-like, you basically have to be a AA company or Ska Studios. And
right,
like if you might want to make a puzzle game, though, you make an environment and then you obsess over that place, basically, as opposed to having to like make hundreds of environments. And that's like, it's a very different project, but it's totally worth it because it leads to the same emotional payoffs you'd want from like any kind of scale of game. So it's the compactness kind of changes what people can accomplish, I figure.
Right, and it depends, but like I feel like making a puzzle game can play to your strengths as a designer, whereas because I can focus on the design, I can focus on the puzzles, I can make them as good as I can be, and then like the presentation is important, but it becomes less so in a way that like I think other games can't sacrifice. Whereas because like the crutch of the game is like figuring out these puzzles. So like if this game looked like half as good, like would the game be half as bad? I don't think so.
There's even diminishing returns, like the dragon that's always being chased with graphics is to add more and more clutter and more detail and more like all these walls would have to be covered in like textures and cracks to the point where they almost go too far in many games and stop looking like a believable space because of how busy every element of the environment is. But specifically in a genre like this, one of the core elements is presumably its readability. And so there's like actually a direct benefit to having a clean visual, I'd figure, because it helps you tell whether something matters. Because if you add too much of a weird, detailed, cracked paint to your walls, people are going to start thinking that that's a puzzle.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I wouldn't say I didn't take advantage of that. I certainly was like, oh man, I really don't have to make this look that great because it doesn't really matter too much.
Like imagine a bunch of imagine this being in a game where like the wallpaper's peeling all over the place. Like there's just vertical streaks all over like it wouldn't work at all. It'd be a mess.
This was a fun one to set up. So.
I like that this room has a few things in it that you just know that you need to think about. Like this, you keep looking at this and it looks different from the other frame stuff, but you don't know what to do with it still. And this is just weird. But even when you find the solution, like I didn't register these door frames at all as being standing out at all, let alone them being like half of the word is just the colored door frames.
Mm-hmm.
You think you know where it's going, and you're wrong again.
I tried to hide the pink stripe with like something, like try to make it be like a pillar or like a coat rack or something like that. And then I was just like, what if I just put it on the wall? Like, what if I just painted the line? Is that like, does that work? And like, it totally does. Cause it just feels, it's just like weird. And there's just no way for you to put two and two together until you know what you're doing.
It'd be hard to do much else with it. I figure like the best I can think of is like a light in this room shining a crack of light onto that wall specifically for like a barely open door, but that seems like beyond the lighting we're dealing with a little bit.
And on some level, I kind of like the choice of it just being like this weird non sequitur element.
It's like another thing, like the page on the fence in the water, where you're like, what does that mean? It obviously means something.
My other favorite one is the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My other favorite one is the flower outside the window in the math room, and you're just looking at that flower, seeing that flower there the whole time, and being like, even when you know that's the puzzle you're working on, you're still just looking at that flower, going, "What the hell am I supposed to do with that?"
Only the correct settings will work. I guess this is the closest thing to there being another moment, like editing the title screen. Is this just fundamental change in what the what's possible here?
Yeah, I like the consistency of this puzzle, because it's like in the other room, and this is something that people don't really pick up on. Like in the other room, you're messing the sliders, and it's like changing the light shining on that flower, the water pouring on that flower, the music in that room, and that's why that flower changes. And so if you really think about this logically, even without the hint, right? And you're like, what do I do to change the music playing on this flower, the light applying to this flower? Like
that just exists in the game, and there's no other constraints.
Right. And so it's like, it does make sense that the world settings would affect that flower versus changing the settings in the room. Everybody tries to do it with the settings in the room, but logically that makes no sense, because the settings in this room apply directly to this thing, right? And
they're
so
just not ready to expand there yet.
Yeah,
you even made it so that you control these with a D-pad, and they have the same diamond as the
and they make the same sound and everything.
Yeah, it's like it's the same interface element, except for the notches, I suppose.
I could have put the symbols here too. It's kind of an oversight, but
well, it'd be like pausing the game in The Witness and realizing that there was a ball with a line coming out of it in the menu, and realizing that there's just like there's something going on here, and like unzipping the game, and then suddenly a different ending happens.
Yeah, I do like that. I mean,
I don't see a lot of menu stuff going on.
That thinking, yeah.
I don't think I see the menu tricks in puzzle games in general, really. Like that was just different altogether.
I think they're hard to do because it's like it's just something you don't think about being an option, right? And so it feels kind of it feels like territory that you can't go into from a design perspective. But the kind of the benefit of making a Dreams game where I don't have to actually get a publisher, or I can make it as hard or as nonsense as I want. I can try things that you wouldn't normally try and see if they actually work. And so there's some learnings to be done there.
Let's see. I've been holding you here for a while, haven't I?
It's all right.
There's the last two questions are probably pretty quick. One of them is just the obvious follow-up of like what other Dream games would you recommend? Because like for people like me, this is my entire exposure. I didn't find out about this game because I was browsing Dreams. I found out about this game and then bought Dreams.
How did you find out about this? I'm curious about that myself.
Somebody mentioned it in my Discord, and I think that was the second time I'd heard of it. And so like once you hear about something like 2 or 3 times, you usually get curious enough to like actually like look into it, and then you're like, okay, I found like there was a video essay discussing this game. and I'm like, okay, this, and I kind of like would sort of like breeze through. I think somebody streamed playing through the entire game, and I just like skipped around at random with it on mute, and like kind of picked up like, okay, there's just like stuff going on in this, and I think this is like a good candidate. And I've got this whole mess where I've got like, as a Let's Player, I've got like these giant spreadsheets of games categorized by genre and what slot they would fit into and so on. But then like whenever I only choose the next game to play when I just finished the previous thing and it's time to record the new thing. I don't plan ahead. And so it's just spur of the moment. Like if I encounter a game on the right day when it's time to pick the choice and I just get really curious about it, then I'll just dive in. And this game got my curiosity the exact day it had to.
Oh, that's fortunate. Yeah, because you're pretty prolific. You've played like played most games that I feel like if I wanted to watch a Let's Play of a game, you've got it. Like I feel like you're running out.
Oh no, I'm not. They could stop making games now, and I would die without finishing my spreadsheet. It's a nightmare. Good. It's maybe the curse of knowing about indie games and even preferring them. There's too many. Like I think like 6 different puzzle franchises that I'm playing right now have sequels I haven't played yet.
Oh wow.
Like Rethink and Da Vinci.
As far as other Dreams games, there's like I always hate this question because like I don't play enough on it, and I always feel like I'm unprepared to answer this question. Because you're busy making a game, right? I just don't play a lot, unfortunately. It's just kind of like a bad habit of mine. But there's like another puzzle, like so somebody who's helping me make the real version of this, he also makes Dreams games, and he makes puzzle games too. His name is RBD Jellyfish, and I really respect his opinion a lot because he makes a lot of puzzle games. His games are kind of on Dreams, they're kind of meme games. Some of them are kind of joke games, and they're still pretty good, but he does have a couple really nice puzzle games on there too. But he's also someone who's made a real game called Sensorium. It's on Steam, and it's a puzzle game kind of like The Witness and kind of like this. So that might be one to check out when you have time. I would
Is that
add
the one that's
spreadsheet.
kind of gray and cell shaded?
Yes.
I think
it's about the 5 senses.
I think it's already in my basalt column gallery.
Oh yeah, he does have that in there.
Yeah, I think that already made its way in. There's a lot of games I know entirely because they've made that list and then they go on another list, and it's like 2 points of contact, so it's easy to remember the title, even if I don't play it for like years.
It's a good puzzle game. It's very like the premise is, about each puzzle area is about one of the 5 senses, and so I think that's an interesting design challenge, especially since some of the senses are like, wait, how do you do that?
Oh yeah. How do you smell in a video game without scratch and stuff? Yeah, maybe I'll try that next. The current next game's picked, but it'd be like 2 games from now. I might be able to get to that.
Yeah, if it's on your list already, then that's good. I just wanted to mention it. And then there's just a lot of good hits on. I mean, you can. If you browse Dreams, if you first get Dreams, like they do a thing where if you're new, they hit you and you're surfing with like the greatest hits. You don't get served up like the general Dream surfing. You get served up with like the cream of the crop for new players. And so like almost anything in that list is worth the effort to play. Like I don't know if it's worth doing like a Let's Play of some of those, because a lot of games on Dreams are not very long, right? Because I saw
there's like some kind of trilogy of adventure games or something. I think they're like Animal People.
There's Pig Detective. Those, it's like an adventure game. The first couple are like, they've gotten much better at making them. And so well, they've just gotten used to, like the first one's very low, I don't want to say quality because it's still good. It's just like not as polished, right? There's the art isn't as good. Yeah. The newer version is like crazy. Like the amount of stuff they've done, and they've gotten like, the voice talent from like Twitch streamers. They even got
I think Troy Baker's
in it, but in like a joke way.
I was confused about that. Oh, did
I don't want to give the
do
joke
something
away,
sneaky?
He's in it. They got him to do a line.
We hit up Troy Baker's Fiverr.
I would definitely recommend those because those are definitely got the longer. They're more stream watchable and streamable. Like a lot of the other ones are just really cool experiences that are just maybe on the short side. And so, if you were to ever do, I would recommend anybody get it just to play those. But like if you were to wanting to do like a series, it might be like, you might want to put like a couple together. I don't know if that's something you would do, but like,
I followed a similar trajectory of like watching someone develop and the games get more in depth when I did the Cube Escape and Rusty Lake games. And like I legitimately just covered the first two games in one episode because they were so short, but you just jam them in there.
Yeah. So I think there might be something there. It's so hard. There's so many things being made all the time on Dreams now. Like, and a lot of it is just like weird. Like, oh, that was weird, and then it's over. And so,
I guess there's kind of like community members, right? That kind of somewhat curate this and try to guide people a bit.
Yeah, the main lists are curated internally by the Media Molecule staff, but then, if you're ever streaming Dreams or playing Dreams on Twitch, like I'm sure somebody will jump in and like direct people to the correct, like, oh, you should play this. Oh, you should play this. There's a lot of good, like a lot of people making horror games. I don't know if I'd say there's a lot of good ones, but that seems to be a very popular genre.
I wonder how well that holds up, or if it ends up silly.
It's mostly silly.
That's a very specific. What is it like? When you see any horror movie in the theater that takes enough risks, there's that dynamic where like half the theater's engaged and half of them are laughing, and there's a big risk. And I'm thinking of that in terms of like Dreams as aesthetic. I'm like, that could get silly really fast, even if you don't want it to.
But there's still some good stuff. I mean, like, there's always going to be good stuff because there's still enough serious creators.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple other games I've made. Another puzzle game that's only like one button. Like it's like you can only press. The whole game is designed around the idea like, how do I make a puzzle game where all you press is a single button? And then I don't know really.
I wonder if that would come out in like a WarioWare kind of mode. Well, Raph asks, when's the next game?
So I'm working on making this for real, I guess, quote unquote. I'm still in the process of figuring out what even a sequel to this would be. Like, even if I want to do that, I mean, I want to, but I don't know how much of the DNA is the same in like a sequel. You know what I mean? It's more like, do I want to just make another puzzle game that has like similar goals? And how much does it really even need to be tied to this? But then I'm also working on like what I'm calling a reverse Pac-Man, where it's like,
I saw something on your timeline, right, on Twitter.
Yeah, it's like you're a gorilla, and it's like Pac-Man levels. They look like Pac-Man levels, but you're like, your goal is to like hunt down the other, like the ghosts, or in this case they're monkeys, and like you can punch them, and it's, instead of them coming after you, they're going after your pellets, and so you have to like stop them. And it's kind of like a roguelike. I just wanted to make, I wanted to do something completely different. I didn't want to make another puzzle game right out the gate, just because I wanted to keep trying to do new things. But that's keeps scope creeping into something bigger and bigger than what it initially started as, and so it just keeps getting like more and more work than I initially anticipated. But yeah, I think the thing I'm most focused on is making the remake of this. Right now, I'm making smaller. I'm just kind of like dabbling in Dreams and not so much focused on it as much as I used to be. I just haven't really hit upon. I mean, I only have so much time, right? And so I think this has gotten enough popularity or enough eyeballs that if I was ever going to try and make a break into like making an indie game, this seems like the best shot. Like, I don't know that I'll have another good idea as good as this to do that with. So I think it's the next logical step. So I'm just,
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Start up your YouTube channel, scream into the abyss for a few months, and then suddenly one thing starts going somewhere, and you're like, well, time to model my life around this one thing, because I don't know if it'll ever happen again. By the way, what was maybe even as a closing note, I don't know if there's a reveal here, or if it was just like a little joke you did or something, but what was the deal with the arches on your Twitter?
That was the thing. That was they were teasing one of they reached out a couple like high profile, I guess let's say, creators to post stuff on Twitter about the arches. And like they didn't even tell us what it was for. They just wanted us to do it as like a viral sort of thing. And it ended up being for one of their community events where like they're making a new game, Inside Dreams, but they're opening up, like you can submit a level like using their assets and make a level for their game, and then they're going to put it all together and make like a big experience, and then they'll put the cream of the crop in there. And so that's what they were wanting us to tease. So it's not
I definitely wondered. I'm like, wait, what did I miss?
Yeah, it was kind of just like a random thing. I don't know how much it hit, but I was happy to do it because it was very straightforward for me to do. But
well, all right. I think we're probably about done here. Was there anything you wanted to discuss or anything you wanted to bring up?
No, as long as I feel like I answered the questions thoroughly enough or satisfying enough that you have enough to use. Probably cut out some of the rambling.
Oh no, we just embrace that here. But
yeah, hopefully it's not too boring.
No, this is really interesting. It's really rare to have the chance to discuss with somebody game development in general, but also just specifically like puzzles are just a weird thing in their own way. Like, and yeah, like it was interesting to hear to some extent, like for example, like how much of these are like following a format versus just like, wow, I just had this like weird dream and then I invented an entirely new style of puzzle whole cloth because I'm just like, that's just like, how do people do this?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, having a goal in mind really helps, or fixating on like some kind of guiding compass. Like, I don't think you can, I mean, I'm sure some people do just like come up with ideas out of the blue. But for me, it's much easier to like have a defined purpose. Like I was saying, like, wanting to on-ramp this style of puzzle that really directs you in a way that helps you come up with ideas that feel new. So that would be, as soon as you try to define what a puzzle is, I feel like you fail, like, so I don't know how to really describe it.
All right. Before we cut this, where can people find you and follow you and know when future games come out, or even when this game comes out in other formats and so on?
Well, the only place to really follow me is on Twitter, and it's under 800pixelgorilla, so pretty easy to find.
If you find a purple gorilla, you're in the right spot.
Yeah. I have been a little bit inactive lately just because I've been really busy, but if anything new comes out, it for sure will hit there. And I every now and then, like I've been thinking about doing it more, but I do stream me creating, and I had in the past. I think that usually happens more when I'm nearing the end, and it's just like a lot of, I know exactly what I'm doing because I feel like it's more interesting to watch somebody making something when they're directed versus me just like ambling around. So I'll probably stream, and it's the same thing on Twitch, 800pixelgorilla. So I mean, you can follow me there with like very low expectations that I'll stream something, but it will definitely be like game design related if I do. But yeah, that's basically it. And I would also encourage anybody who doesn't have Dreams. Like Dreams is always on sale. Like I think right now it's like $10, which is like criminal.
Is it actually $10 right now?
Yeah, like even if you don't plan on making anything, which like is totally fine. Like the amount of content you get for $10 is staggering. Like,
oh yeah. And once again, this is available on PS4 and PS5. I don't know if they like ported it or if it's just like automatically backwards compatible. I think everything on PS4 pretty much works on PS5.
Yeah, there's no PS5 version yet.
Yeah,
but you do get like
the second half of this game was my first ever PS5 game.
Yeah, you do get higher frame rate and like higher fidelity on the PS5, but like there's no specific improvements. I'm sure that'll come eventually. I'm not making it. I don't know when.
Oh yeah, and for the record, the Discord preview probably looks a little choppy, but this game it seems to be running at like 60 or something. Like it seems completely
It should
smooth.
be 60, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're on the PS5, it's definitely 60.
It
If
is
you're on
A-okay.
PS4, it's probably 30. Editing this thing on the PS4 is like a beast. I think it runs at like 15 frames per second editing
when
it.
you have all the dev tools at your disposal at the same time, and it's like just destroying the console.
Yeah, on the PS5, it's like you don't even notice. It's like still 60 in the edit mode. But like,
if anyone can find a PS5.
Fine. Yeah, I was just fortunate.
Yeah, that poor console. But yeah, definitely thanks for coming by. This was an experience. I've never interviewed anyone. Did not. I think much like how you might have not expected to do an interview about this game, I never expected to be interviewing game developers about their games.
Well, you got to start somewhere. I'm like the smallest game developer you could probably find, but I don't think you could get more lower on the pole than me. But
I think I've had a couple of offers before, but I didn't like their games.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
And then I'm just like, I don't know if the opportunity is worth me kind of like figuring out how to navigate this social situation.
Yeah.
Because I'm very opinionated.
Oh yeah. Well, I think you have to be, right. Like,
yeah. Well, there's some people that just get through this just glossing over everything. Like they're enthusiasts by nature, and they just put on a smile and get through everything. And it's not that compelling, but people show up for it. But like one of the pushbacks I often get, especially with indie games, is that like criticizing games is almost seen as cruel. Like it's just an indie game and so on. And I'm like, whenever I hear anything about game development and testing and so on, whenever I hear about this, it always sounds like people are usually abundantly aware of the exact things I'm pointing out. Like I'm not even really saying anything new.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Like everything like a lot of things you pointed out that you didn't like or that you thought were strange choices, I'm like, I also don't like that.
Yeah.
So like
one of my sorry, Discord delays a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
But one of my formative nightmare experiences was playing through Zenith, a game that I thought had like one of the best told stories almost ever, but the game was trash. And that juxtaposition was so compelling and interesting, how the game was just a train wreck, like technically, and like just pure gameplay. But the story was so interestingly well developed and told, and full of like setup and payoff and character arcs and like touching moments and comedy and so on. And then I'm like, this is so compelling and interesting. And then I find out at the end, the finale, the developer commented saying that they saw the whole thing and every mean thing I ever said, and they're and they all took it in stride and all that, and they were like really flattered, and they were really flattered by all the nice things that I said on top, despite the intense criticism. But what a way to find out is finding out at the end, when you can't react anymore, that the developer was there the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I was like jumping on every episode because I like wanted to see what you'd say and stuff. So I was very interested. I think the people that get most offended by your criticisms are not the people who made the game, which is kind of funny to me. Because I'm not speaking for every developer, but from my point of view, like the more harsh the criticism, as long as it's like not just there to be negative, like there's always like a reason behind it, even if I don't necessarily agree with the reason, is always helpful, right? Because like if somebody just says something's good, like I'm like, okay, it's good, thanks. Like I don't learn anything from that. But if you say you don't like something and you say why, I'm always like, oh man, that's an interesting way to look at it. Like maybe I should think about that sort of thing more. Or you're like, oh, I thought this puzzle was going to be like this, and I'm like, oh, that is an interesting way to think about that puzzle. And so like that kind of thing, I feel like you don't get.
Was it this room that you were like panicking and DMing me on Twitter about because you thought I was gonna? People,
yeah, I was so worried about that because it totally like breaks the experience if you do the wrong thing here first. This is my worst. I hate this room the most.
So did the second solutions work then?
Yeah, you can punch in the second solutions. Yeah, you can.
Right, because I think you responded to somebody that asked like, "Does could you type down immediately at the beginning and would it work?" And you said yes.
Yeah, you can type "I'll" immediately in the title and get the ending of the game.
That would be really weird though to land on.
But that was a choice because I didn't want to do like just what's it, arbitrary gating of stuff like that. Like I just wanted it to work.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't make sense for it to arbitrarily not work, right? So like it's just not there. The problem I have with that is it's too easy to like think I'm wanting you to do the second thing before you're doing the first thing. And so like I've seen people put in the second answer there the most and get super confused why nothing works the way they think it's supposed to. Which, you know, that's a design choice that I have to live with. But
because you'd have to like tear it all up and start over to change it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'd have to change a lot actually. But it is a source of like when I see like someone like you streaming a high profile or playing a high profile in a high profile way, I'm like, oh man, I really hope he doesn't do that because it's gonna like totally derail like the whole feeling of the game and in not a way that I'm proud of. So I don't even know why I was panicking because it's not, you'd already done everything. So it was like,
yeah, it was over.
It was already over with.
Much like your totem pole comment, I'm also like, it's very funny to hear myself referred to as high profile.
Well, it's high profile for me.
So,
like,
yeah, yeah.
Like, and for a Dreams game, right? Like, I mean, you got thousands of people watching, which for me is like, I anticipated like, you know, oh, maybe 50 people will play my game. Like,
yeah.
So for me, it's like a pretty cool experience, especially since I've been watching your stuff. Like I stumbled across your stuff like years ago, and I was like, you were doing Let's Plays of games that like nobody was doing. And I was just like, oh man, this is like right up my alley. And lots of puzzle games, which like a lot of Let's Players don't do for obvious reasons.
Oh yeah, because your immediate feedback is that it's a bad idea. Because everyone seems mad at you.
Yeah, like everybody gets irrationally irritated with you because you didn't solve something or see something fast enough. Yeah. And I'm like, have you played a puzzle game before? Like that's kind of how it works. Like,
yeah, no, I touched Portal co-op multiplayer maps early on like my previous channel, and then never returned until I think a Legend of Grimrock 2's heavy puzzle elements opened the door to me to the idea that people liked watching puzzles get solved, because without that context I would avoid this whole genre. Like still, like I'd be playing Portal in my free time and not doing it for the internet because it seems so hostile. But now it's like my job. Like The Witness kind of gave me a job, I guess. It's a way to look at it at this point.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a gap in like the Let's Play for like stuff like that. I think there are definitely harder videos to make and be interested in, like puzzle games in general, just because of the pacing. You know, it's not like God of War where like the pacing is really good to watch. But
oh yeah, no, AAA games are currently like the non-open world ones are developed like a theme park. Like you just go through this linear sequence of events that are paced well to be theatrical, so then that translates directly into being a well-paced video, and then it just does the work itself, and you just kind of do that, and you do one video a day, and you can really like make that just work. But no, like self-guided puzzle solving is just a trip and a half. I have to be in the right headspace to even fire it up for the day.
Right. But I do think there's like I mean, because there's lack of that video type, like that's how I found you, and I think that's maybe I do think those videos did, I mean, they look like people were interested in it, and it's not the type of game I thought would be like that. So I think there's something there. I just don't know what precisely.
Mm-hmm. Some of it's no, there's always the superficial element. It's the like obviously people stick to it because they like it, but there's definitely an element of like the clickbait, like the just you need to get somebody to instantly attach to something based on like the really superficial first glance element of it. And so to some extent, I think, especially with my audience, because of The Witness and the Myst games, if you just show people a colorful island that looks, and say it's a puzzle game, and it's like this compact island that reminds them of like the original Myst Island a little bit, that gets them to click. And that's the hardest part. Like, that's so much is lost because like it doesn't matter how good your game is if nobody clicks on the videos about it or like clicks on the thumbnail on Dreams or something, then it just doesn't exist. It's in their world. And then it'll never happen. And that sucks. I hate that part about the world, but it's just part of the process. Like, yeah, like I when I'm currently writing scripts for my other channel, like I think about like, what is the headline for this, and like what's the thumbnail for this. Like I need to think about that while I'm writing it, because that'll be whether it does well. That'll be half of the work as opposed to the actual contents of the video.
Right.
That's just the world it is. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in. This was enlightening. And
Thanks for playing
and
it.
A unique
like,
opportunity.
doing all this. Yeah. I'm curious to see how you put this together. So, well.
All right. Thanks for watching. That's a good sentence. I nailed it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.